Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. As you can see in the picture today, let's start the story of what if Issei becomes the leader of the Kuoh Academy. Cold sweat ran down Hideki's forehead as his mind was trapped in a nightmare. In his dream, shadows stretched around him, as if darkness itself was trying to envelop him, immobilize him. A bright glow broke through the darkness, and there he was, a man with bright blonde hair and outlandish clothes in shades of pink and purple, almost as if he belonged to some kind of sinister carnival. The man's smile was sharp, stretching across his face like that of a playful predator. His very presence made the air thicker, difficult to breathe. Hideki muttered, trying to move, but his feet felt heavy, as if they were nailed to the ground. "Oh, you wonder who I am, boy?" The man's voice sounded mocking, almost musical, but with an underlying malice that chilled the blood. "That doesn't matter, what matters is where are you going?" The man extended his hand and a portal of dark energy began to form behind Hideki. Before he could react, he felt the invisible force dragging him into the vortex. The air whistled in his ears as his body was violently pulled into the darkness. "Wait! Why?" Hideki tried to ask, but his voice was drowned out by the pressure that enveloped him. His body fell into the void, an abyss of shadows and lightning that swallowed him mercilessly. Hideki woke up with a start. His breathing was irregular, and for a second, he wasn't sure where he was. The shadows in his room, the soft glow of the moon coming through the window, everything felt different, unfamiliar. He wasn't in his world anymore, but in a place full of dangers he didn't know yet. Then he remembered that it hadn't been a nightmare, but his current reality. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since he had come to this world, one where, unlike his own, humans didn't have quirks. He remembered for a second the dream he had, the only clue as to how he had come to this place. The only thing different between the dream and what actually happened was that the man never spoke to him. It was surely his mind trying to give him more clues that didn't exist. He looked at his room with disdain. It was small, barely enough for a futon on the floor and a small circular table. Despite everything, he didn't have many other options. This was his life now. He reluctantly stood up. Coming into this world with nothing but the clothes on his back had been a challenge. He had spent weeks of uncertainty, looking for a place to stay until, a little over a month ago, a small family consisting of the parents and their 7-year-old son, who owned a family restaurant, offered him a job in an act of kindness. In addition, they allowed him to sleep in this small room that was part of the restaurant. Hideki sighed, staring at the ceiling tiredly. He knew he should be grateful, but his mind kept wondering how he had ended up in this place so different from everything he knew. He looked at the time on his phone, which read 4:24 a.m., a little earlier than usual, as he usually got up at 5 a.m. He sighed, knowing that he would not be able to fall asleep anymore. He got up, picked up the keys to the place, and changed into more athletic clothes. He went out into the fresh early morning air and began jogging, as part of his daily routine. The streets were deserted at this hour, something that Hideki was grateful for. As he ran, he looked curiously at the city he was in, Kuoh, located in Japan. The reason he was so curious about it was because, in his world, this city did not exist. Instead, the city of Muzurifu, which in his world was a bustling metropolis full of heroes, did not seem to be present in this strange place. Everything he knew felt like a distant memory, almost as if it belonged to another life. He continued with his daily training routine. It wasn't as demanding as he used to be in his world before coming here. It was probably partly due to his emotional state, affected by the uncertainty of being in a completely unknown place. Also because this new world seemed calm compared to his own. There were no heroes or villains, nor the constant threats and battles he was used to. The streets were calm, and life seemed to follow a more normal pace, at least in appearance. Hideki finished his morning tour, returning to the restaurant he now called home. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, bathing the city in shades of orange and gold. He entered the small kitchen of the place and began to prepare breakfast, something simple but nutritious. He not only cooked for himself, but also for the family that had taken him in. It was a way to thank them for everything they had done for him. After breakfast, he took a quick shower and changed into his school uniform. The Kuoh Academy uniform consisting of a black jacket over a white long-sleeved shirt with black highlights and a black bow at the collar, matching black pants, and brown dress shoes. Thanks to the kindness of the family that had taken him in, Hideki had managed to enroll in the academy, as they helped him with all the necessary paperwork. It hadn't been easy, especially since he didn't have any kind of registration in this world. He didn't exist in the government systems, nor did he have any documents proving his identity. However, the couple had moved heaven and earth to help him, and he didn't want to be a burden on them. For that reason, Hideki had studied hard to earn a scholarship to the prestigious academy. He knew he couldn't continue to depend on them, and the scholarship gave him the opportunity to support himself and return the favor. Fortunately, he hadn't had any problems with this. After all, Hideki had always been a very disciplined boy both in his training and in his studies. After a long and tiring day at the academy, Hideki returned to the teppanyaki restaurant. The door made a soft clink as it opened, and he was greeted by the warm aroma of freshly prepared food and the muffled laughter coming from the kitchen, where the sound of the griddle and the sizzling of ingredients mixed in a cozy atmosphere. "Hideki!" exclaimed Kaori, the owner of the restaurant, with a smile that seemed like a beacon in the darkness. Her enthusiasm was a brief light in the tunnel of his day. "You're just in time, customers are already asking for you." Hideki returned a tired, forced smile, which barely concealed the accumulated tiredness and sadness. "Sorry for the delay, Kaori-san. I'll go change and then take care of the kitchen." Takashi, Kaori's husband, patted him on the shoulder as he passed. "Don't worry, kid. We know the academy isn't easy, but you always do a great job here." "Wait, Hideki-san!" A childish voice called out from the hallway. Little Hiro, Kaori and Takashi's son, ran out to him with an excited expression, which contrasted sharply with Hideki's mood. Hideki's smile widened to a more genuine one, bending down to greet the boy. "Hey, Hiro! How was your day?" "Great!" the boy exclaimed, waving a drawing proudly. "I made this for you at school." Hideki took the drawing, which showed a version of himself wearing a superhero cape. His smile became a little more genuine, though deep down, sadness was still present. "Wow, that's amazing. Thanks, Hiro. I'm going to put it in my room." Kaori approached, laughing with a warmth that seemed insufficient to soothe Hideki's sadness. "Hiro kept talking about you all day. I think he's made you his personal hero. He even says you're like his older brother." Hideki smiled, touched, but also with a hint of melancholy. "Really, Hiro? I'm glad you think so." The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. You're like an older brother to me, Hideki-san." Hideki smiled, feeling a mix of gratitude and pain. "Well, I'll try to live up to that title." The family's efforts to make him feel good were comforting, but the feeling of isolation still lingered in his chest. After changing into his chef's uniform and leaving the drawing in his room, he headed to the kitchen, where he began preparing the evening's orders on the teppanyaki griddle, the distinctive sound of cooking in full view of the customers creating a vibrant atmosphere. As he quickly and precisely chopped vegetables, Hideki couldn't help but reflect on the life he had left behind and how his cooking skills, acquired out of necessity, now became a means of coping with his existence in this new world. He thought of his grandfather, Inoki, and how he used to stress to him the importance of being self-sufficient. The sadness of not being able to share his achievements with him was overwhelming. "You're a great chef, Hideki," Kaori said, approaching the teppanyaki griddle. "Customers always praise your dishes. I don't know what we would do without you." Hideki smiled again, but the fatigue in his eyes was evident. "Thank you, Kaori-san. I actually like cooking. I learned to help my grandfather. I guess I owe my gramps a lot for that." Kaori watched him for a moment, as if she could sense the sadness behind his smile, but decided not to push him. "Well, you do have a natural talent. We're very grateful to have you here, Hideki." Hideki nodded silently, continuing his work with a renewed energy that only masked the underlying pain. Though he had at least found a place where he could belong, the emptiness in his heart was still present, a constant reminder of what he had lost and the dreams he still longed to achieve. The bell at Kuoh Academy rang, marking the end of the morning break. Students hurried back to their classrooms, and Hideki walked at a slow pace, lost in thought. The school uniform, though elegant, did nothing to hide the vertical scar near his right eye, a mark of the battles he had faced in his previous world. Often, curious glances and implied questions from his classmates were directed towards that scar, but Hideki had learned to ignore them over time. In the hallways, most of the students seemed to be focused on their own business, gossiping and laughing in groups. Hideki, with his height of 178 centimeters, stood out a bit in the crowd, but his solitary presence and reserved attitude made him seem even more aloof. He wasn't as handsome as Kibayudo, who always attracted attention with his impeccable appearance, but Hideki had his own kind of appeal. As he walked to his classroom, a group of first-year students approached him. Among them, a few girls in neat uniforms and shy smiles looked at him curiously. "Hey, Hideki-senpai," said one of the girls, a young girl with short brown hair, "can you help us with our math homework? We don't quite understand the teacher's explanation." Another girl, with blonde braids, nodded. "Yes, we would really appreciate it. We heard that you are very good at this." Hideki stopped in his tracks and smiled kindly. Although he was a solitary student, he was always willing to help those who needed it. "Of course, what is it that you don't understand?" The group gathered around him, and Hideki leaned over to look at their notebooks. As he patiently explained the concepts, he noticed the girls looking at each other, clearly impressed by his kind demeanor and ability to explain things clearly. Although he wasn't seeking attention, it was evident that his efforts weren't going unnoticed. "Thank you, Hideki-senpai," said one of the girls with a smile. "You're a real lifesaver." "No problem," replied Hideki with a sincere smile. "We all need a little help from time to time." With the task cleared up, the group of girls said their goodbyes and headed to their respective classrooms, casting admiring glances towards Hideki. He continued on his way to the classroom, feeling the weight of his emotional situation. Sometimes he wondered what his life would be like if he could return to his own world, but he knew he had to move on and adapt. Later in P class, Hideki met up with the first-year students in the gymnasium. The teacher had decided to organize a team exercise to encourage collaboration. Hideki, as a second-year student, was mixed in with the first-years to facilitate teamwork. Among the first-year students, Hideki spotted Kaneko Tuju, a classmate he had interacted with before. Kaneko was observing the other students with a calm expression, but her gaze fell on Hideki as he prepared for the exercise. Kaneko approached Hideki with soft steps and a light smile. "Hello, Hideki-senpai," she said in a calm voice. "How have you been?" Hideki was surprised to see her approaching and smiled at her. "Hello, Kaneko." "Nothing out of the ordinary." Hideki called her by her name at her request. Kaneko nodded and watched as Hideki pulled out a small bag from his backpack. From it, he took out a homemade cookie and offered it to Kaneko. "Here, a cookie for you," Hideki said. "I know how much you like sweets and desserts." Kaneko accepted the cookie with a surprised and grateful expression. "Thank you, Hideki-senpai. You didn't have to do it, but I really appreciate it. It was a kind gesture on your part." "It's nothing," Hideki replied with a smile. "I like to share what I have with friends." Kaneko nodded in understanding. "That's very kind of you." With a friendly smile, Kaneko joined her team for the exercise, and Hideki joined the group as well. Pii, the sound of the teacher's whistle echoed throughout the field. "Well, guys, today we will have mixed volleyball matches, as we had agreed last week. Form your teams and get ready to play," the teacher announced enthusiastically. Physical education class was one of the most anticipated activities of the day, especially since the mixed volleyball match promised friendly and fun competition. The teams, made up of students from different grades, generated an atmosphere of camaraderie that everyone seemed to enjoy. Hideki was on a team that was comprised of second and first-year students. He was ready to play and enjoy the match, not letting the pressure of being in the spotlight get to him. On the other hand, the opposing team was led by Kaneko, and Hideki couldn't help but notice that she was accompanied by some of her first and second-year classmates. The match started with great enthusiasm, and it quickly became clear that Hideki's physical ability stood out among the players. His agility and strength were notable, and although he did not seek the spotlight, he could not help but attract attention for his performance. Kaneko, despite her size, surprised everyone with her great athletic ability. She moved with a precision and speed that made the game more challenging for Hideki's team. However, Hideki was not intimidated and counterattacked with skill. At one of the key moments of the match, Hideki jumped up to shoot, and his height and strength made him stand out even more. The ball flew over the net with impressive speed, and the opposing team barely had time to react. The girls on Hideki's team cheered, and Hideki gave them a confident smile. From the stands, several students watched the match with interest. The girls, in particular, seemed impressed by Hideki's physical abilities. His movements were precise and full of energy, and every action he performed on the court attracted admiring glances. After a dynamic exchange of moves, the match reached a critical moment. Kaneko, with her ability to anticipate moves, managed to block a powerful attack from Hideki, causing the crowd to erupt in cheers and exclamations. Despite Kaneko's efforts, Hideki quickly recovered and helped his team maintain the lead. Finally, the referee's whistle signaled the end of the match. Hideki's team won by a narrow margin, and both teams shook hands in a sign of respect and camaraderie. Hideki approached Kaneko, who had a look of concentration and exhaustion on her face. "You're impressive, Kaneko," Hideki commented with a smile as he approached her. "You played really well. I still can't believe how high you can jump." Hideki was genuinely surprised by Kaneko's skills. Kaneko smiled back with a slight nod. "Thank you, Hideki-senpai. You played well too. It was a good challenge." "Thank you very much, Kaneko," Hideki replied. As the teams dispersed, Hideki noticed that some students were still talking about the match and their performance. Although he wasn't interested in being the center of attention, he couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction at having contributed to the general enthusiasm. With the match coming to an end, Hideki and Kaneko headed to the showers, glad for the good energy of the game and the chance to share a sporting experience. Despite the differences between their worlds, moments like these reminded him that he could still find connection and camaraderie in his new surroundings. After the exciting volleyball match, Hideki headed to the boys' locker room to change. The energy from the game was still coursing through his body, and even though he was tired, he felt a sense of satisfaction that he couldn't ignore. He entered the locker room with the same calmness he displayed on the court, unaware that his classmates would be paying attention to his presence. The locker room was filled with lively conversation and laughter from the students changing after the game. Hideki made his way to a free bench and began to undress, conscious of the heat and humidity in the air. As he changed, several of the boys on the team, who were mostly first years, who had been watching the game and talking about it, began to murmur amongst themselves. One of the boys, with messy hair and a curious expression, made a comment to the group. "Have you seen Hideki-senpai's physique? It's impressive. You can tell he trains seriously." Another boy, who was drying his hair with a towel, nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, and not only that. The scars he has on his body, that must be from some epic story or something." However, among the boys who didn't know Hideki well, some looked on with some uneasiness. "What about those scars?" one of them said nervously. "Don't you think he's a little scary? He looks like he was a delinquent or something." Another boy, who was also watching, nodded with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Yeah, I don't know, those scars give him a pretty intimidating look." But then, another student who knew Hideki better chimed in. "It shouldn't be possible. Hideki-senpai is very kind. He's helped me on several occasions, even when he didn't have to. I don't think he's pretending or like everyone else thinks." The boy who had raised the concern raised an eyebrow. "Really? Are you sure? Maybe he's just pretending to hide his true nature." The student defending Hideki shook his head. "I don't think so. I've seen how he treats others. He's a genuinely good person, despite those scars. I think it's just a hard life story, but it doesn't mean he's a bad person." Hearing these comments, Hideki realized they were watching him and turned to them with a kind smile, not showing any discomfort from the attention. "Oh, those scars are from an accident I had while trying to save someone. It was quite a complicated situation, but luckily everything turned out okay," he explained with a mix of sincerity and vagueness. "Nothing to worry about." One of the boys, who was especially interested, leaned in to take a closer look. "He must have had a pretty rough life. Though really, that makes him seem more impressive, you know?" Hideki shrugged and changed into the clothes he had brought for after the game. "I've just had to face a few obstacles in my life. But the important thing is to keep moving forward." The boys continued to talk amongst themselves, some with a mix of respect and admiration, as Hideki finished getting dressed. Even though he had noticed the stares and comments, he didn't let them affect him. Instead, he focused on getting ready to go back to the restaurant and do his shift at work. As his teammates continued to chat about the match and Hideki's abilities, he headed towards the exit of the locker room, feeling a mixture of satisfaction for his good performance in the match and calm for keeping his focus on the future that awaits him. The Occult Club was in full swing when Kaneko entered the room. Rias and Akino were chatting while looking through some old documents and books. The air of the place was always steeped in mystery, accentuated by the relics and artifacts that decorated the room, making the atmosphere feel charged with secrets to be discovered. Kaneko silently approached, still thinking about her recent interaction with Hideki. Settling into a nearby armchair, Akino was quick to notice her presence with her characteristic playful tone. Era, Kaneko-kun, you seem very interested in Saito-kun lately, Akino commented with a mischievous smile. Have you found more than just a classmate? Kaneko blushed slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible on her normally unruffled face. It's not like that, Akino. We're just friends, she replied, trying to maintain her usual calm. Rias, who had been watching the conversation with curiosity, frowned slightly before leaning forward. Saito-kun, I'm not familiar with him. Could you tell me more about this boy? Akino let out a small laugh, enjoying the situation. Well, Hideki Saito-kun has started to attract some attention lately. Although he is not the most famous student at Kuoh Academy, his physical ability and kind attitude have made him stand out. He has shown impressive performance in sports, and his dedication to studying is notable. He even has a scholarship. Some already call him the hero of the academy for his exemplary character. Rias listened with interest, but her mind focused on something else. Kaneko, have you noticed anything strange about him? Any trace of supernatural energy or connection to the sacred gears? Kaneko shook her head. No, Rias Butchu. I don't sense any supernatural energy in him. His presence is a little different from other humans, but he doesn't seem to have any special powers. Maybe it's my imagination influenced by how kind he's been to me, she muttered to herself, though Akino managed to catch her last words. Different how? Akino asked with a curious smile, while Kaneko looked away. He has a strange dog smell, Kaneko added, muttering quietly. However, Akino heard her perfectly, causing her smile to widen. Oh, are you afraid that Saito-kun likes dogs more than cats? Akino joked, causing Kaneko to blush even more. It's not that. Kaneko was quick to reply, visibly embarrassed. The smell I perceive is more similar to that of an Inuyokai, but I can tell that he is human. Maybe I'm just confusing him, and he has a pet dog. Rias frowned with a thoughtful expression. It's interesting, although there is no obvious supernatural energy in him. His presence, and the smell of Inuyokai you mentioned could suggest some connection with supernatural creatures. Perhaps Hideki has some unknown link with these beings, or he could even be related to some kind of special magic or lineage. Akino, with her usual curiosity, joined the conversation. That sounds plausible. Inuyokai are known to have a particular influence on their surroundings. If Hideki has some relation to them, that could explain why you sense something different about him. Akino smiled mischievously. Perhaps it would be useful to ask Hideki directly if he has any pets, especially a dog. Sometimes, a simple conversation can clear up doubts. Rias nodded, still thinking about the possibilities. That's a good idea. Although we can't detect supernatural energy in him for now, it's important to be alert to any details that may arise. Appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most subtle clues can reveal more than we imagine. Hideki walked through the city after a long day, thoughts heavy on his mind. Despite the warmth of the Nishimiya family and the connection he had begun to forge with Kaneko, a shadow seemed to follow him at every turn. Something was missing. Something he couldn't ignore. As he passed a small donut shop, he stopped. The sweet aroma drew him in, but it was more than that pushed him inside. It was nostalgia, that memory of days gone by in his old world, when moments as simple as buying a donut could bring him some happiness. He walked in, ordered a few, and walked out with a bag in his hand, as if clinging to that small illusion of normality. He sat down on a nearby bench, a forced smile adorning his face. He opened the bag with an emotion he tried to imitate, seeking comfort in the familiar smell of donuts. It smells delicious," he exclaimed, forcing enthusiasm. He took a donut and brought it to his nose, smiling in a way that hid what he was really feeling. "What a heavenly aroma, it smells like honey cakes." And without further words, he said with a big smile before taking a bite, "This is amazing. It's super delicious. It's so good to be alive," he said, trying to convince himself as he took a bite. He knew that even though he was grateful to be alive, the sweet taste couldn't fill the emptiness he felt. But as he chewed, the sweet taste failed to fill the emptiness he felt. Around him, the world continued to spin. Children ran past, giggling excitedly because their mother promised them a toy. A couple walked hand in hand, sharing a light, laughing conversation. Friends bickered in banter, one saying, "I know you too well, you won't." A family walked past him, the little girl laughing with contagious joy as her parents followed close behind, smiling. "Sniff delicious," he murmured, his voice cracking with pent-up emotion. "They're so tasty." His hands stilled as he spoke, and the sadness he'd been hiding in his voice became evident. Sobs began to escape from his chest. The donuts he was holding fell to the floor, forgotten. "Why?" he whispered, his hands covering his face, desperately trying to hold back the tears that were now flowing uncontrollably. His mind filled with memories, which now felt more distant and painfully unreachable. He remembered how his grandfather used to wake him up every morning, his scoldings wrapped in unconditional love, and the unwavering support he gave him in his darkest moments. Images of his friends, especially Shiso and Kurishima, also appeared, those who had been his refuge in difficult times. The good times shared, in a time when the weight of becoming a hero had not yet overwhelmed him, now felt like distant echoes, filled with a nostalgia that amplified his sadness. However, with those happy memories also came the crushing weight of his current situation. He had lost what used to give his life meaning. His family, his friends, his dream of being a hero, everything seemed so distant now, so out of reach, that the contrast between his past and his present only accentuated his pain. In that moment, surrounded by people who lived their lives as if nothing had changed, Hideki felt the true weight of his loneliness. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to break down. The tears, which he had held back for so long, fell uncontrollably. The week went by as normal as Hideki's life went. He was dedicated to helping Hiro with his homework and offered all possible support in the restaurant. Initially, the restaurant was quite ordinary, with the kitchen in the back and customers only able to see the chef's back. However, after Hideki joined the team, Takeshi, impressed by Hideki's cooking skills, had an innovative idea. He decided to transform the restaurant into a teppanyaki-style establishment. At a teppanyaki restaurant, the chef cooks ingredients directly in front of customers on a hot iron griddle. Not only does this style offer a unique culinary experience, but it also makes for an entertaining spectacle, with the chef performing eye-catching tricks and techniques, including juggling utensils and fire demonstrations. Hideki's skill in handling the griddle and his dynamic style in the kitchen added a new level of excitement and sophistication to the restaurant, attracting more customers and offering a memorable experience for all. The evening was in full swing at the teppanyaki restaurant. The hot iron griddle in the center of the room gave off a warm glow and a soft crackling sound as Hideki moved deftly around it. Customers clustered around the griddle, expectant and excited for the show that was about to begin. Hideki, with a confident smile on his face, began preparing the ingredients. First, he carefully placed a layer of oil on the hot griddle, the subtle sound of sizzling oil filling the air. Then, he picked up a pair of sharp knives and began cutting vegetables and meat with a skill that seemed almost artistic. Each movement was precise and graceful, and the rhythm in which he worked seemed choreographed. "Get ready for the show," Hideki announced excitedly, as he tossed the cut vegetables into the air before releasing them onto the griddle. The vegetables began to pop and sizzle, creating a melody of sounds that attracted everyone's attention. The customers clapped and cheered as Hideki continued his routine. With a nimble flick of his wrist, he tossed the pieces of meat into the air, deftly twisting and turning them before placing them back onto the griddle. His skill at manipulating the utensils and ingredients while maintaining a lively conversation with the customers added a personal touch to the show. "Anybody want to see a special trick?" Hideki asked with a mischievous grin. The excited customers nodded enthusiastically. Hideki picked up a pair of kitchen cutlery and began juggling with it. He spun the utensils in the air, catching them with perfect timing. Then, he performed a little flame stunt, adding a touch of drama to the show. People gasped as they watched the fire dance with controlled skill. Finally, Hideki began plating the food with impeccable presentation. As he did so, he flashed a smile at the customers and answered their comments and questions about the ingredients and techniques used. The personal interaction and culinary spectacle made the experience unforgettable for everyone present. When the last dish was ready, Hideki gave one last bow to the audience, receiving a standing ovation. The customers left satisfied, and the restaurant returned to its usual tranquility. Kaori and Takeshi, watching from a corner, approached Hideki with proud smiles. "That was an impressive show, Hideki," Kaori said, clearly excited. "You have a natural talent for this," Takeshi added. "The restaurant has never been so popular." At that moment, a friend of Takeshi's, who was sitting at a nearby table, couldn't resist making a joking comment. "Hey Takeshi, it seems you've found a chef who makes your food taste like beginner food," he said with a mocking laugh. "I think it's time you passed the apron to Hideki." Takeshi laughed good-naturedly, nudging his friend lightly. "Come on, don't be so harsh. Hideki has really taken this to another level." Hideki laughed and raised a hand in thanks. "Thank you, but I'm not as good as you say. I'm just trying to do my best." The night concluded with a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction in the air. Although Hideki knew there was still much to learn and many challenges to come, moments like this reminded him that despite being in a different world, he had found a place where he could truly shine. Monday came, and Hideki was relieved after a hectic weekend at the restaurant, which had gained a lot of popularity in a short time. Today, as it was Monday, he had the day off from the restaurant, and Mr. Takeshi would be in charge of tending the place. As he left the academy, Hideki sighed in satisfaction. The day had been normal, like any other, and although he missed the excitement and uncertainty of his previous world, with its constant attacks from villains, he was also glad that people in this world did not have to worry about such threats. With a feeling of tranquility, he began to walk aimlessly, enjoying the freedom of a free day and the opportunity to explore and relax in his new surroundings. Hideki strolled through the park, enjoying the fresh air and the brief respite offered by a rather busy daily routine. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, tinting the sky with warm, golden hues. He decided to head to a more secluded part of the park, looking for a quiet corner where he could sit and relax. Suddenly, a soft noise caught his attention. Turning his head, Hideki found himself looking at a creature that looked like something out of a fairy tale, a feline with pointed ears and a long tail, covered in white fur speckled with black spots. The creature, with its mystical appearance, looked clearly out of the ordinary. Upon noticing Hideki's presence, the Bakaniko bristled, baring its sharp teeth and making a low, menacing sound. Hideki stopped short, feeling a chill run down his spine. His instincts warned him not to get too close, but his fascination with the creature kept him still. What are you?" Hideki muttered, astonished. Although he knew many creatures from mythology, he had never imagined meeting one in reality. The momentary surprise made him forget his fear. The Bakaniko, seeing that Hideki showed no signs of aggression, seemed to calm down slightly, although it still displayed a cautious attitude. Hideki decided to act carefully so as not to provoke it. He remembered his grandfather's lessons on how to treat animals and tried to apply those principles. "I'm going to take a step back," Hideki said, trying to sound calm. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand what's going on." As he slowly backed away, Hideki tried to make gentle movements, avoiding any gestures that could be interpreted as a threat. Fortunately, the Bakaniko seemed to accept his peaceful attitude, and the threatening sound began to subside. In an attempt to gain the Bakaniko's trust, Hideki slowly crouched down and extended a hand, maintaining a non-threatening posture. Although he didn't know if the creature would understand the gesture, he hoped to at least convey his lack of hostile intentions. Suddenly, Hideki heard hurried footsteps approaching. He looked towards the source of the sound and saw a brown-haired girl running towards him with a worried expression on her face. "Wait!" the girl exclaimed upon seeing the situation. She stood between Hideki and the Bakeneko. "Don't come any closer." The Bakeneko, sensing the sudden movement, became even more alarmed and, in an act of defense, launched a fierce attack. With a swift swipe of its paw, it tore through the air with its sharp claws and struck Hideki before he could react. The impact sent Hideki flying and a deep claw wound formed on his left arm, causing sharp pain. Hideki fell to the ground, his left arm bloodied and a stunned shock on his face. The Bakeneko, seeing the damage it had caused, quickly retreated, vanishing into the bushes with surprising speed. Abe rushed to Hideki, her face pale and worried. "You're hurt. Let me help you." Despite the searing pain and shock at the attack, Hideki remained surprisingly conscious, thanks to his training and the harsh trials he had faced in his world. The wound on his left arm was deep and painful, and he was sure he had broken his arm and must have at least 3 broken ribs. The combination of pain and blood loss made him constantly dizzy, but the determination and willpower he had developed over the years kept him alert. He forced himself to sit up with effort, leaning against the trunk of a nearby tree to steady himself. His vision was blurring from the pain and blood loss, but he didn't allow himself to fall apart. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to ignore the dizzy feeling that was spinning in his head. The approaching girl's voice became a distant murmur, distorted by the pain and vertigo. However, Hideki couldn't allow himself to lose consciousness. His mind was still active, assessing the situation and looking for a way to overcome this new challenge. With a firm expression despite the pain, Hideki focused on controlling his breathing and staying awake. He knew that giving up was not an option, especially after having faced so many hardships in his life. Although the wound was causing him intense pain, he held on to his determination to overcome any obstacle that came his way. The girl finally reached his side and began to speak urgently, but Hideki was too focused on his effort to stay conscious to hear clearly. He made an effort to look up at her, his eyes showing a mix of pain and determination. With a shaky but determined voice, Hideki gave her a look that said everything he couldn't put into words. Although the situation was dire, his resilience gave him the strength to face this challenge. He knew he had to hold on until he received the necessary help. The girl, who turned out to be Kaom, knelt down beside Hideki with an expression of deep concern. Her eyes fixed on Hideki's bleeding wound and the pain that was clearly reflected on his face. Wasting no time, she began to assess the severity of the situation. "No, don't move!" Kaom exclaimed urgently. "I'm going to help you." Despite the chaos and anguish in her voice, Kaom moved with surprising calm under the pressure. Realizing she didn't have a first aid kit, she felt a little lost, but her resolve didn't waver. "What can I do?" she asked herself, trying to keep her voice calm as she searched through her backpack. Hideki, despite the overwhelming pain, managed to stay conscious and thinking. He looked at Kaom and, with difficulty, managed to get out a few words. "My belt," Hideki said in a broken voice. "Use it, make a tourniquet. I need you to stop the bleeding." Kaom, understanding the gravity of the situation, quickly removed Hideki's belt. She placed it around the injured arm, tightening it as tightly as possible to stop the flow of blood. "I'm sorry, this must hurt," Kaom murmured as she carefully adjusted the belt. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you're okay." As she applied the tourniquet, Kaom looked at the Bakeneko, who was now observing the scene from a safe distance. The creature seemed less threatening, although it was still attentive to what was happening. At that moment, the Bakeneko, who had observed the scene from a safe distance, began to relax as it noticed the aura of kindness in both humans. The creature approached with cautious movements, its gaze fixed on Hideki's wound. With a soft snore, the Bakeneko began to lick Hideki's wound with its warm, moist tongue. As the Bakeneko licked, Hideki felt an unexpected relief on his arm. The scratches began to close and the pain from the wound noticeably reduced. However, the broken bones were still not healed, and the lingering pain reminded Hideki that the situation was not yet completely resolved. Abe watched in amazement as the Bakeneko used its healing ability. The transformation in Hideki's wound was impressive, and her heart filled with hope as she saw that the situation was improving. She approached Hideki with a relieved expression, relieved that at least the Bakaniko was helping. I'm so sorry, Abe said in a shaky voice, touching Hideki's arm carefully. I didn't know the Bakaniko would do something like this. I hope you feel a little better. Hideki, though still in pain, looked at Abe gratefully. Thank you. Even though the pain is still there, this has helped a lot. Hideki, still leaning against the tree and with his injured arm wrapped in the belt Abe had improvised as a tourniquet, watched the Bakaniko as it slowly walked away. The relief of seeing the wound partially healed made him feel a mix of gratitude and wonder. Although the broken bones still hurt, he knew the Bakaniko's help had made a big difference. With a visible effort, Hideki sat up a little and, looking towards where the Bakaniko had gone, said in a weak but sincere voice, thank you very much for your help, Hideki said quietly, aware that the Bakaniko probably couldn't fully understand him, but wanting to express his gratitude anyway. Abe, upon hearing Hideki's words, looked around, searching for the Bakaniko that had already disappeared into the bushes. Although she couldn't see the Bakaniko, she understood Hideki's gratitude. I'm so sorry, her voice filled with regret. If I had arrived a little earlier, this could have been avoided. I didn't know the situation had gotten so serious. I'm truly sorry for not being here to prevent it. Hideki, still in pain but recognizing Abe's sincere remorse, smiled at her reassuringly. Don't worry, Hideki responded in a softer tone. I appreciate everything you've done. Sometimes things don't turn out as we hope, but your help and concern mean a lot. What matters is that you're here now. Abe nodded, visibly relieved by Hideki's words. The two shared a moment of mutual understanding as they waited for the Bakaniko to get far enough away so Hideki could receive more assistance. After a few minutes, Hideki, with Abe's help, got up from where he had been and began walking slowly toward the hospital. Although the pain in his arm and ribs was considerable, Abe's help and the relief of his superficial wound being treated gave him a bit of strength. Abe assisted him carefully, ensuring he didn't stumble or injure himself further. By the way, what's your name? Hideki asked, trying to start a conversation to distract himself from the pain and get to know his savior better. Abe, smiling slightly despite the situation, replied, My name is Kaom Abe. I live nearby and I'm also a student at Kuoh Academy, just like you. I also have a job that involves keeping supernatural creatures under control so they don't attack humans. I was walking through the park when I saw the commotion and ran over to see if I could help. Hideki nodded, a look of gratitude on his face. Choosing to omit the fact that she dealt with those creatures for now, he decided to leave it unsaid. Thank you for showing up at the right moment, Kaom. My name is Hideki Saito. I've been in this city for a while, and to be honest, I'm still getting used to everything here. Kaom nodded in understanding. I see. It must be tough adjusting to a new place, especially after everything you've been through today. If you need help finding your way around or with anything else, don't hesitate to ask me. Hideki smiled, feeling a bit more at ease thanks to Kaom's kindness. I really appreciate that. It's good to know there are people willing to help. And by the way, I owe you one. It's not something I can easily repay, but I promise I will. Kaom chuckled softly. Don't worry about that. I'm just glad you're okay. My job is to keep humans safe from supernatural threats, but it's nice to know that, once in a while, I can help in a more direct way. Let's get to the hospital and make sure you're properly taken care of. After that, if you'd like, we could grab a coffee and talk some more. Hideki nodded with a smile. That sounds great. Thank you, Kaom. I'm glad I met someone like you today. As they continued their way to the hospital, Hideki and Kaom chatted about trivial things, discovering they had more in common than they initially expected. The conversation helped distract Hideki from the pain and made him start to feel a little more comfortable in his new surroundings. Hideki returned to the Nishimiya family's restaurant late at night after spending several hours at the hospital with Kaom Abe. The night had been long and exhausting, but at least his arm was now in a cast, and he had agreed to discuss the supernatural world further with Abe on another occasion. He was grateful to have met someone like Kaom, who had helped him navigate the situation and provided a glimpse of normalcy on such a difficult day. When he entered the restaurant's kitchen, the Nishimiya family was waiting, visibly concerned about his late return and the state he was in. Kaori, Hiro's mother, approached quickly, her gentle eyes filled with worry. Hiro stood beside her, his expression a mix of anxiety and curiosity. "Hideki, please, tell us what happened," Kaori said, her voice trembling as she examined the cast on his arm. Hideki tried to smile to reassure them, despite the pain still lingering. "It was just an accident. I fell and ended up breaking my arm. I went to the hospital, got it set in a cast, and they told me I just need some time to recover. I'm fine, really." Takashi, Hiro's father, stepped closer, his expression a mix of concern and relief. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything else?" Hideki nodded, touched by their concern. "I'm fine, really. I just need to rest a bit. The hospital gave me some advice, and I'll follow it." "Thank you for worrying, it means a lot to me." Hiro, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "How did you hurt yourself?" Hideki decided to leave out any mention of the Bakeniko, and offered a more plausible explanation. "I tripped on something while walking in the park. It was a silly accident, nothing serious." Kaori nodded, seeming to accept his explanation. "Well, at least you're in good hands now. If you need anything, don't hesitate to tell us. And please take care of yourself." Hideki smiled, feeling comforted by their warmth and support. "I will. Thank you all for your concern. Tomorrow, after I've had some rest, I'll tell you more about what happened, but for now, I just want to sleep." With a final gesture of gratitude toward the Nishimiya family, Hideki headed to his room. Though tired and in pain, he felt relieved to have a place where he was welcomed and cared for. The night passed with the promise of a new day, and Hideki prepared himself to face the future, both in his recovery and in uncovering the new realities that life in this world had introduced to him. Kaori Nishimiya and her husband, Takashi Nishimiya, remained awake despite the late hour. Hideki had collapsed onto his bed the moment he touched the mattress, and Hiro had already been sent to his room to sleep. Takashi, aware that Hideki's situation was far from ordinary, suspected that the young man's injuries were tied to something more than a simple accident. "So, what really happened to Hideki?" Takashi asked, his eyes fixed on Kaori, his expression betraying growing concern. Kaori, knowing that Takashi already had his own suspicions, began to speak. However, she paused for a moment and exhaled calmly before turning to meet Takashi's gaze with a seriousness that only he could fully understand. "I caught the scent of a Bakeniko on Hideki," Kaori said in a grave, resolute tone. "It's not something you can easily detect unless you have heightened senses like mine. The fact that he was attacked by such a creature is deeply troubling." Kaori's Inuyokai nature allowed her to pick up the Bakeniko's scent on Hideki, thanks to her heightened senses. Although Takashi was human, the love they shared had led Kaori to seek permission to live in the human world with her family. Takashi listened intently. While he was already aware of his wife's Inuyokai heritage and her supernatural detection abilities, the revelation that she had identified a Bakeniko in Hideki's case underscored the gravity of the situation. His expression grew more serious as he processed this information. Frowning, Takashi said that would explain the state he was in when he returned. "But I don't understand, how did Hideki end up encountering a Bakeniko? I thought these creatures usually stayed away from humans." Kaori nodded, her gaze falling to the floor as she pondered how to address the situation. "That's true. Bakeniko typically avoid humans, but they can sometimes appear in unexpected places. It's possible Hideki was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. My ability to detect these creatures is more refined due to my Inuyokai nature, so I can say with certainty that he was attacked by one." Takashi sighed, his concern only partially eased. "What worries me is how we handle this without raising alarms. We don't want Hideki getting drawn into more trouble involving the supernatural." Kaori stepped closer, taking her husband's hand. "You're right. We need to protect him and make sure he's okay. Maybe we should talk to him about what happened, but gently, so as not to frighten him. It might also be wise to research more about dealing with encounters with creatures like Bakeniko." Takashi nodded, his resolve firm. "Agreed. We'll handle this the right way. The most important thing is that Hideki recovers and stays safe." The two moved to their respective tasks, determined to ensure Hideki's protection and to shield him from facing the challenges of the supernatural world alone. The next day at the academy, Hideki arrived with his arm in a cast. Though he had managed to endure the pain, his appearance clearly reflected the severity of his injuries. The doctors had advised him to rest, prescribing painkillers for his fractured ribs, and warning him to avoid sudden movements. As he walked through the hallway, Hideki ran into Kaneko, who immediately noticed the cast on his arm. Her expression turned to one of concern as she quickly approached him, stopping just in front of him. "What happened to you, Hideki-senpai?" Kaneko asked, her voice filled with both curiosity and worry. Realizing that Kaneko had picked up on his condition, Hideki tried to maintain a calm demeanor. Although he wasn't entirely sure how much Kaneko knew about the supernatural, he decided to avoid mentioning anything about it. "It was an accident at the park," Hideki said with a strained smile. "I fell while walking and hurt myself." "Nothing serious," Kaneko frowned, clearly unconvinced by his explanation. She could still detect the faint scent of the Bakeneko lingering on Hideki, but she chose not to push further. Her concern for him remained evident, and it seemed as though she was carefully assessing the truth of his words. "I hope you recover quickly," Kaneko said, softening her expression slightly. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask me." Hideki nodded, genuinely grateful for her concern. "Thanks, Kaneko. I'll keep that in mind." As Kaneko walked away, Hideki let out a small sigh of relief. He suspected that Kaneko might have sensed something odd about his explanation, but he was determined to keep the incident with the Bakeneko a secret. The experience had been a harsh lesson and a stark reminder of the unexpected dangers in the world. It also reinforced the need to be cautious about what he shared. The day passed uneventfully. Throughout his classes, several girls approached Hideki, asking about his arm. He stuck to the same story, claiming he had fallen while walking, trying to keep his explanation as simple as possible. When classes ended, Hideki was in the hallway, finishing packing up his belongings, when he noticed Kaom weaving purposefully through the crowd of students. She seemed to be searching for someone, and when their eyes met, Kaom smiled and walked straight toward him. "Saito-san." Kaom greeted him, her tone cheerful but with a hint of concern. "It's good to see you. Can we talk for a moment?" Hideki was surprised to see her and nodded, following her. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Kaom looked at him with a mix of seriousness and curiosity. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay after last night," she said. "How are you feeling?" Relieved to see her genuine concern, Hideki nodded. "I'm fine, thank you. Just a few minor aches, but nothing serious." Kaom nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "I'm glad to hear that. I also wanted to talk to you about what happened last night. Do you have a moment so I can explain a few things?" Intrigued, Hideki replied. "Yes, of course. I'm willing to listen. Where would you like to talk?" Kaom smiled at him. "We can go somewhere quieter. There's a lot to explain, and I think it's better to do it in a more relaxed environment." The two headed to a secluded corner of the academy, away from the hustle and bustle of the students. Once they reached the quiet spot, Kaom began to talk about the supernatural world, capturing Hideki's attention with the seriousness and depth of her words. Hideki sat with Kaom on a bench, the concern and curiosity in his expression reflecting the weight of the subject at hand. Kaom sat beside him, her demeanor calm but purposeful. "All right, Saito-san," Kaom began with a composed tone. "I want to explain a few things about the supernatural world. First of all, you need to know that there are a vast number of creatures and beings that coexist with us in this world, even though most people can't see them." Hideki listened attentively, already anticipating this kind of explanation after what had happened with the Bakeneko. "So, what happened last night was definitely a supernatural creature, right?" Hideki asked, trying to process the information. "Exactly," Kaom confirmed. "What you saw last night was a Bakeneko. They're beings from Japanese folklore with special abilities. In general, there's a wide variety of supernatural entities, ranging from spirits to magical creatures with different powers and behaviors. And you, what's your role in all of this?" Hideki asked, trying to understand Kaom's involvement in the supernatural world. Kaom smiled slightly, a mix of pride and seriousness in her expression. "My family has been tamers of supernatural creatures for a long time. My parents travel a lot, so I'm usually the one who ensures supernatural creatures don't get too close to humans in this city, to prevent incidents like the one last night." Hideki slowly nodded, beginning to grasp the magnitude of what Kaom was explaining. "I see. So, are there more people like you who deal with this? Yes, there are others like me, Kaom replied. Though they aren't always visible, or operate the same way. The truth is, the supernatural world is much more complex than it appears at first glance. And what about me in all of this? Hideki asked, feeling a bit lost but intrigued. Sometimes, people like you come into contact with the supernatural without even realizing it, Kaom explained seriously. What happened to you with the Bakaniko isn't something that happens every day, which is why I feel you need to know what's going on. It's important that you have a basic understanding of these creatures, so you're prepared in case you encounter something similar again. Although last night was an accident, you're now part of this world, and for one reason or another, you'll likely get involved again. Hideki nodded, recognizing the value of the information. Although he still had many questions, he at least knew he wasn't alone in understanding the supernatural world. Thank you for the explanation, Kaoma-senpai, Hideki said, showing his gratitude. I appreciate you telling me all this. You're welcome, Saito-san, Kaom responded. If you ever need more information or help, don't hesitate to come to me. As Hideki processed everything he had just heard, a key question began to form in his mind. If supernatural creatures like the Bakaniko existed, what else could be hidden in this mysterious world? Kaoma-senpai, does this mean magic is real too? Are there people who can use it, like in stories? He asked, his tone filled with curiosity, uncertainty, and a hint of hope. Kaom looked at him with a small smile, fully understanding Hideki's surprise. Yes, magic exists, though it's not like in fairy tales, she replied. There are many forms of power, from magic to techniques like senjutsu or tuki, which allow manipulation of vital energy. Some people are born with special abilities, while others develop them through training. The supernatural world is much broader than you could imagine. Hearing Kaom's words, Hideki felt a spark of hope ignite within him. As he processed all the information about the supernatural world, one thought lingered in his mind: maybe magic, or one of these abilities, could help me find a way back to my world. He couldn't share this desire with anyone, but the possibility that something in this universe held the power to open a path back fueled his motivation to keep moving forward. Finally, lifting his gaze to Kaom, he decided to ask his question carefully, hiding his true intentions. Then is there a way I can learn some of this? Magic or something similar? He asked, with a mix of curiosity and seriousness. I don't have any special abilities, but if I'm going to be involved in this world, maybe learning something could help me defend myself. Kaom studied him carefully, sensing there was something deeper behind his words. After a moment of reflection, she nodded. It's possible, she replied. Magic is accessible to some, but there are also disciplines like senjutsu or tuki, which don't require innate magical talent but rather control over vital energy. It's not an easy path, but if you're willing to try. Hideki felt his determination solidify. This was another challenge, but one that now filled him with renewed hope. Even though he couldn't tell anyone the true reason behind his desire to learn, he knew he would try with all his strength. And you? Could you teach me any of that? I don't want to be a burden if I come across something supernatural again, he asked seriously, hoping Kaom could be his guide in this strange world. Kaom gave him a small smile before gently shaking her head. I'm afraid I can't teach you those things, she replied. My abilities are more focused on taming and controlling supernatural creatures. It doesn't require complex magic or advanced techniques like senjutsu or tuki. My skills are more instinctive, a connection with beasts, but it wouldn't help you much in that regard. Hideki nodded, a bit disappointed, but grateful for her honesty. I see, he said thoughtfully. Still, I appreciate you explaining all this to me. At least I know a bit more about what I'm facing. Kaom looked at him with a sympathetic expression. Don't worry. Even if I can't teach you, I'm sure you'll find someone who can guide you if you're determined to learn. You're not alone in this. Kaneko began her day like any other, getting ready to head to the academy and fulfill her responsibilities as part of Rias Gremry's peerage. Everything seemed routine until she arrived at the academy and encountered one of the few boys she interacted with outside of Kiba, Hideki Saito. Despite his popularity, Hideki maintained a reserved demeanor, which made him somewhat mysterious. He didn't have many close friends, but he always radiated energy and kindness when talking to Summoning, a trait that had caught Kaniko's attention from the start. As she watched him, Kaniko recalled the moment she first met him. It was during lunch break. As usual, she was heading to the Occult Research Club to eat in peace, but along the way, she spotted Hideki lying under a tree, finishing his lunch. The boy pulled a cookie out of his bag, and Kaniko couldn't help but stop to watch him, drawn both by the cookie and by the familiar aroma wafting from it. Using her keen sense of smell, she noticed it was homemade. Noticing Kaniko staring at him, Hideki gave her a wide smile and offered the dessert without hesitation. Kaniko, slightly surprised, accepted the gesture and silently sat beside him to eat her own lunch. From that moment on, something changed between them. A quiet and simple bond had formed, marked by Hideki's selfless kindness and Kaniko's calm acceptance. Setting that memory aside, Kaniko approached Hideki. He seemed to have some kind of sixth sense for detecting her presence, as even though his back was turned, he looked over his shoulder just as she was getting closer. It was worth noting that Kaniko was remarkably stealthy, even without trying, which made it all the more curious that Hideki always seemed to notice her arrival. However, what truly surprised her this time wasn't his sharp perception, something she had already grown accustomed to, but the fact that his arm was in a cast. Kaniko quickened her pace, her eyes fixed on the cast, and approached Hideki with evident concern. "What happened to you, Hideki-senpai?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and genuine worry. As she spoke, a strange scent reached her senses. She sniffed almost imperceptibly, making sure not to make her curiosity obvious. As she focused on the smell, she noticed something unusual: the unmistakable trace of a bakaniko. The scent was especially concentrated around Hideki's cast, sparking even more questions in the young demon's mind. "It was an accident at the park," Hideki said with a forced smile. "It was evident that lying wasn't his strong suit. I fell while walking and hurt myself." "It's nothing serious." Kaniko frowned, clearly dissatisfied with his answer. She had noticed the bakaniko scent on Hideki's body, which unsettled her. Although her concern was still evident, she seemed to be assessing the truth of Hideki's words, but she decided not to press him further. "I hope you recover soon," Kaniko said, softening her expression. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask me." Hideki nodded, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Kaniko. I'll keep that in mind." With a final glance, Kaniko walked away from Hideki, though her thoughts were far from at ease. As she walked through the academy hallways, her mind raced. The bakaniko scent she had detected on him was not something she could ignore. Even though Hideki tried to downplay the matter, Kaniko knew that supernatural beings didn't get involved with humans casually. Having made up her mind, Kaniko headed to the Occult Research Club room. She needed to inform Rias about what she had discovered. The possibility that Hideki had encountered a supernatural being deserved to be investigated, and Kaniko trusted that Rias would know how to proceed. As she quickened her pace, she couldn't help but wonder how much more of the truth Hideki had left unsaid. Kaniko quickly arrived at the Occult Research Club room, where she found Rias Gremory and the other club members gathered around the table. Rias was focused on a report but looked up when she saw Kaniko enter. "Kaniko, what's the matter?" Rias asked, noticing the worried expression on her companion's face. "Rias Buchu, there's something I need to report," Kaniko said, approaching with seriousness. "Today at the academy, I noticed that Hideki-senpai had the scent of a bakaniko. Although he tried to downplay it, I'm concerned that he may have been involved in an incident with a supernatural creature." Rias frowned at the mention of Hideki's name and the detail about the bakaniko. Her face turned thoughtful as she processed the information. "Hideki? Hideki Saito, right? The second-year student you mentioned to Akino the other day, correct?" Rias asked, recalling the young man. Kaniko nodded. "Yes, that's him. He said it was just an accident at the park and tried to downplay it, but the scent of a bakaniko was unmistakable." Rias stood from her chair, her expression now completely serious. "This is concerning. Supernatural creatures don't usually get involved with humans without a reason. We need to find out exactly what happened and why Saito was caught up in this." "What will we do?" Kaniko asked, clearly worried about her friend. "First, we'll conduct an investigation to gather more information about the incident," Rias responded with determination. It might be useful to speak directly with Saito to better understand the situation, but we'll also need to be cautious not to alarm him. Additionally, we should investigate if there are any other signs of supernatural activity in the area. Kaneko nodded, relieved that Rias was taking the situation seriously. Understood. I'm ready to help in any way I can. Rias offered a reassuring smile. Thank you, Kaneko. I'll keep you updated on the next steps. In the meantime, keep an eye on Saito and see if you notice anything else unusual. The day had come to an end, and Hideki, after his conversation with Abe about the supernatural world, returned to the restaurant. The customers greeted him cheerfully and jokingly commented on how they hoped he would recover soon, as Takeshi's cooking wasn't as delicious as his. After the restaurant closed, Hideki was in his room, focused on his academy assignments, when he heard a knock at the door. Come in, Hideki called out, knowing the only ones who usually knocked on his door were the Nishimiya couple. Hiro never even bothered to knock before barging in. As he spoke, Takeshi and Kaori entered the room. Hideki, there's something very important we need to tell you, Kaori began with a serious tone. What is it, Kaori-san? Hideki asked, noticing how unusual Kaori's seriousness was. Takeshi took a deep breath before speaking. We know this might seem confusing, and we want to be completely transparent with you. He paused briefly before continuing. The truth is, our family has abilities beyond the ordinary. Kaori is an Inu-yokai, and Hiro is a half Inu-yokai. As for me, I'm just human, like you. Hideki looked at Takeshi and Kaori with a mix of surprise and confusion. Inu-yokai? Does that mean? Kaori nodded. Yes. In this world, Inu-yokai are a race of supernatural beings with traits similar to dogs. Hiro, as a half Inu-yokai, has a mix of our abilities and human traits. Trying to process the information? Hideki asked. But why are you telling me this now? We know that broken arm wasn't caused by an ordinary accident. It was the result of an attack by a Bakeneko. The fact that you encountered a supernatural creature indicates that the world you're now involved in is far more complex than you realize, Takeshi explained. Kaori stepped closer to Hideki. We want you to know we're here to help you. It was never our intention to involve you in the supernatural world. We've only tried to live a normal life. However, we knew that, given our connection to that world, something like this could happen sooner or later. Hiding his initial shock, Hideki responded. This is a lot to take in. I didn't know anything about the supernatural world until the Bakeneko attacked. He ran a hand through his hair. How did you know about the Bakeneko? As I mentioned, I'm an Inu-yokai, and I have traits similar to those of dogs. I could identify the Bakeneko's scent as soon as you returned home, Kaori said. Hideki took a moment to digest what he had just heard. He had already learned a little about the supernatural world from Kaom Abe, but this revelation from the family that had taken him in made everything feel far more real and personal. Kaoma-senpai already told me a bit about the supernatural world today, Hideki said, glancing at his bandaged arm, but I didn't expect you to be part of it too. Kaori nodded, her expression softening. I imagine all of this must be overwhelming for you. We didn't want to hide it from you, Hideki, but we thought it was best to let you settle in a bit more before revealing it. The Bakeneko attack changed that. Takeshi stepped forward, placing a hand on Hideki's shoulder. The warmth of his gesture contrasted with the cold weight of the emotions Hideki was grappling with. Since you came here, we've considered you part of our family. We don't want you to face this world alone. Kaori and I will help you with whatever you need. Even though I don't have supernatural abilities, you'll always have our support. Hideki looked up at them, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. The fact that the people who had become his refuge were now so deeply involved in the supernatural world only heightened his sense of being lost. Thank you, he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude that barely masked his uncertainty. I really don't know what I would have done without you. Kaori smiled warmly, but the gesture failed to dispel the cloud of sadness surrounding Hideki. You don't need to thank us. But you should know that you'll be more exposed to these kinds of situations from now on. Although we didn't want to pull you into this world, it seems that fate has guided you here. Hideki let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on his chest like a heavy stone. The Bakeneko attack, the conversation with Kaom, and now this revelation, everything seemed to be happening too fast. Although a spark of hope was beginning to ignite in his mind, He wondered if he could find answers to return home amidst all this chaos. "I'm going to need your help," he finally said, a mixture of humility and resignation in his voice. "I don't know much about this world, and I don't want to be a burden to you." "You're not a burden, Hideki," Takashi said firmly yet warmly. "We'll always be here to support you and help you find answers. And if you decide to get more involved in this world, Kaori can teach you how to defend yourself better." Kaori nodded, her calm smile barely concealing the concern she felt for the burden Hideki carried. She didn't know much about the boy's past, but from the moment they had met him, she had sensed he bore a sadness that weighed heavily on him. "That's right. I'd have no problem teaching you how to control your ki," she said kindly. "You could even learn to use tuki, which is an advanced technique. I've noticed that your ki is surprisingly strong for a normal human." Hideki's eyes widened in amazement, but his enthusiasm was tinged with an underlying sadness. He remembered that Kaom had mentioned something about tuki, but hearing it from Kaori made the possibility of a new hope feel more real and at the same time, more overwhelming. "I definitely want to learn," he replied, trying to mask the mixture of anxiety and hope in his voice. "You can sense my ki? Could you explain a bit more about what it is, exactly?" Kaori tilted her head, pleased by Hideki's curiosity, and took a moment to choose her words carefully. "Ki is the vital energy that flows through all living beings," she began to explain. "It's the force that sustains you, what keeps you alive and active. The stronger and healthier you are, the more powerful your vital energy will be. Controlling it allows you to enhance your physical abilities, increase your stamina, and eventually develop techniques like tuki, which concentrates that energy to boost your physical strength and defense." Hideki pondered her words, slowly processing what they meant. The idea of having a hidden strength within him was new, but he was beginning to understand why both Kaom and now Kaori had mentioned ki. "Do you think I could learn to control it?" he asked seriously, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and determination. Kaori nodded again, looking at him with confidence. "Of course, Hideki. With proper training, discipline, and a bit of patience, you could master your ki and use tuki. It's not something that happens overnight, but with effort I know you'll achieve it." After the Nishimiya's revelation, the couple returned to their room, leaving Hideki alone with his thoughts. The silence of the night enveloped him as he sat on his futon, staring at the cast on his arm while his mind drifted away from his physical wounds to the abyss of his inner confusion. Everything he had learned that day, from the conversation with Kaom to the surprising revelation from the Nishimiya family, had left him overwhelmed and emotionally drained. "A supernatural world magic yokai," he murmured to himself, lying back on the bed and staring at the ceiling. "This isn't just a dream or a fantasy, it's real." The weight of these revelations was palpable. Before arriving in this world, he had been a boy without a quirk in an environment where supernatural powers were the norm. Now, he was in a completely different place where the supernatural not only existed but had become a fundamental part of his life. The idea of developing real abilities was both a source of hope and an overwhelming burden, and the connections he was forming in this world made his desire to return home feel increasingly conflicted. Could this be my chance to go back? If I managed to master ki, could I find a way to return home? Hope flickered in his mind, but it was quickly invaded by doubt and sadness. He couldn't ignore that in this new world he had started building relationships and finding a purpose he had never imagined. Kaneko, Kaom, the Nishimiya family here, he wasn't just a boy without powers as he had been in his own world. Here, he seemed to have the opportunity to be something more, and that only made his decision to return home all the more complicated. But do I really want to go back? The question hit him hard, and the weight of his doubt settled over him like a shadow. Since arriving here, he had always thought that returning home was his only goal, but now, with each passing day, he felt his connection to this world growing stronger. Did he really want to leave behind what he had started to learn and the people who cared about him? No, perhaps that thought, the idea of not wanting to return because of the relationships he was building, was just an excuse to cover up what he truly desired. This opportunity to gain power, after so many years of yearning for a quirk, had presented itself almost as if destiny were offering him a second chance. All he had to do was be in another world to achieve it. His mind wandered back to a painful memory from his previous life. He was 15 years old, in his first year at Kuoh Academy. During a training camp, a tragic incident occurred. He and Katsuki Bakugo were kidnapped by the League of Villains. The villains were interested in Bakugo's explosive personality, which they saw as the makings of a future villain. As for Hideki, the only one who showed interest in him was All for One. He never understood the reason behind that interest, but All for One offered him something he had dreamed of his entire life, a quirk. A power, precisely what he had always longed for. But All for One didn't just offer him a quirk, offered him a path to darkness, a path that would betray everything Hideki believed was right. Despite his deep desire to have a quirk, Hideki rejected the offer. He couldn't become a villain, he couldn't betray his own values or stop being who he was just to gain the power he had always wished for. Now, in this world, that opportunity had presented itself again, though under different circumstances. Here, there were no malicious offers from villains, but the dilemma remained: what was he willing to sacrifice to gain power? And how would that affect his true desire to return to his world? Would he have to abandon the idea of going back? Hideki sat in silence, looking out the window of his room. The moon illuminated the night sky, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of his decisions crushing him. He remembered how, in his world, he had always wanted to be a hero. But now, in this new world, the word hero had taken on a different meaning. Could he really consider himself a hero if his desire for power was rooted in something as selfish as the need to feel whole? Is this what I always wanted? He wondered, his mind spinning between desire and doubt. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at his door. It was Kaori, holding a cup of tea in her hand. "I thought you might like something to help you relax before sleeping," she said with a gentle smile. Her presence always had a calming effect. Hideki accepted the cup and nodded gratefully, though his mind remained restless. "Kaori-san, do you think that if I managed to master this key, I could?" He hesitated before continuing. "Could I use it for more than just defending myself?" Kaori looked at him intently, as if she understood the depth of his question. She sat down in front of him, speaking with serene calmness. "Ki is a source of life. It's not just for protecting or attacking. It's balance, it's control over oneself and one's surroundings. But Ki is not a magic key that solves all problems," Kaori explained. "It's a tool, and like any tool, it depends on how you use it, and most importantly, why you use it." Hideki nodded slowly, taking in Kaori's words, though part of him couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of using it as a means to find his way home. "Kaoma-senpai already explained a bit about Ki and Tuki to me, but I feel like it's more than just a combat technique. There's something deeper, isn't there?" he asked, searching for an answer that would calm his thoughts. Kaori gave him a faint smile, though her eyes revealed a mix of understanding and concern. "You're right, Hideki. Ki can open doors, but not all of those doors lead to what you're looking for. Sometimes, on the path to what you think you desire, you find other things that change your perspective. Power, if not balanced with the right purpose, can lead you down dangerous paths." Kaori's words echoed in Hideki's mind. The right purpose. What was his true purpose? To return to his world? To be a hero? Or to continue forward in this new place where he was beginning to find a reason to stay? "You have much to learn, Hideki. But remember, this true power doesn't lie in what you can do for yourself, but in how you can help others through what you've learned. You've already done that here, without even realizing it," Kaori added with a kind smile. "Take your time. Don't rush your decisions." Hideki watched her silently, taking in what she was saying. The doubt remained, but clarity was starting to break through. Did he really need to rush to find an answer? Perhaps this new world had more to offer him, something he had yet to discover. "Thank you, Kaori-san," he finally said. "I really appreciate what you're teaching me and what you and Takashi have done for me." Kaori nodded warmly before standing up. "Rest well, Hideki. Tomorrow we'll start your training, but for now, you need a clear mind and a rested body." As the door closed behind her, Hideki was left alone with his thoughts once again. There were still many unanswered questions, but one thing was certain: his life in this world would not be simple. He couldn't ignore the call of power, nor the desire to return home, but now he understood that everything would depend on the purpose he chose to follow. He looked at the moon once more, closed his eyes, and prepared himself for what lay ahead. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Hideki found himself in the restaurant's backyard, alongside Kaori. The fresh morning air cleared his mind, although a slight nervousness lingered. This would be his first serious training since arriving in this world, and while excitement filled him, he knew that what he was about to learn was not something ordinary. "Today we're going to start with the basics," Kaori said, crossing her arms as she surveyed the surroundings. "Your arm is still in a cast, so we'll focus on the flow of your ki. As I mentioned before, ki is the energy that flows within you, and to control it, you first need to learn to feel it. It all begins with your breath and your ability to connect with that internal energy." Hideki nodded, concentrating on her words. This was completely different from any type of physical training he had done before. Here, it wasn't just about strength or endurance, but something much deeper, an internal control that required calm and focus. "Sit down, close your eyes, and listen to your body," Kaori instructed, pointing to a space on the ground. "Inhale and exhale deeply. Feel how the air enters and leaves your lungs. Visualize your ki as a river flowing within you, slow but steady." With his casted arm resting on his lap, Hideki sat on the grass and closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply, letting the sound of his breathing fill his mind. At first, he could only focus on the dull pain of his broken arm and the discomfort of the cast, which began to frustrate him. "Don't rush," Kaori said in her usual soft and serene voice. "Ki is not something you can force. It's like a thread of silk, it moves gently, and if you pull it too hard, it will break. Just flow with it." She noticed how Hideki was starting to grow impatient and decided to intervene with a calming presence. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to relax once more. Gradually, he began to perceive a slight vibration within his body. It was a faint yet present sensation, like a current he had until now ignored. Without resisting, he allowed that energy to flow through him, following Kaori's instructions. The feeling was strange yet comforting, as if something inside him was awakening from a long sleep. "I feel it a little," he finally murmured, opening his eyes with a hint of uncertainty. "But it's so faint I don't know how to control it." Kaori gave him a gentle smile, pleased with the progress he had made. "That's normal," she replied confidently. "Feeling your ki is just the first step. Controlling it takes time, patience, and above all, consistency. We'll continue like this until you can feel your ki at all times, without having to concentrate solely on it." Hideki nodded, although he still struggled to accept that something as abstract as ki could take so long to master. He was used to intense physical training, where pain and immediate effort translated into tangible improvements. But this was different. It was subtler, more delicate. "Patience has never been my strong suit," he admitted with a tired smile as he closed his eyes again, trying to refocus his mind on that internal current. Kaori watched him with a mixture of understanding and determination. She knew that Hideki was used to pushing his physical limits, but this type of training required a different kind of discipline, one that was more introspective. "It's natural to want immediate results," Kaori said as she sat beside him. "But ki doesn't respond to brute force. It requires you to listen to it, to feel it in every part of you. Don't rush it, just let it flow." The silence between them settled once more, only interrupted by the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. Hideki tried to do what Kaori suggested, releasing his tensions and letting that faint vibration within him move freely. With each passing minute, though the progress was slow, Hideki began to feel that energy flowing more clearly within him. It was no longer a vague or unreachable current, he could now perceive it in various parts of his body, as if every fiber of his being was recognizing, for the first time, something that had always been there, asleep. "I can feel it more clearly," he whispered, almost fearing that speaking louder might break the fragile connection he had just established. "But it's still hard to control." Kaori gave him a warm smile, her eyes radiating understanding and patience. "That's the next step," she said in a soft but confident tone. "Ki is not something you force. You need to learn to guide it, not impose your will upon it. It's a dance with the environment, not a battle against it." Hideki opened his eyes, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and reflection. Her words struck him in a strange way, touching something deep within him. It was a different philosophy, almost contradictory to what he had grown to believe. Then, a distant memory emerged in his mind. Vital Strike, a retired hero and one of his mentors at Kuoh Academy. That old warrior, always strict and serious, had said something similar during their training. Hideki had arrived in Osaka for his internship after the UA Sports Festival. The place where he would be training was an old dojo, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Upon entering, he was greeted by a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. As soon as he stepped into the dojo, he felt a murderous intent directed at him, so intense that he stumbled back, swearing he had been attacked. "A lot of bloodlust," muttered the old hero upon seeing Hideki retreat. "Young man, you carry a lot of aggression within you. For a moment I thought you were a villain." Nervous and bewildered, Hideki bowed in apology. "Please forgive me, Vital Strike Sensei, but I think you're mistaken," he said respectfully, not fully understanding what was happening. "I felt as if you were attacking me, or was I imagining it?" The old hero snorted disdainfully, taking a step forward. "Your ears are still wet, kid. Tell me, what's your name?" "It's an honor to meet you, Vital Strike Sensei." "I'm Hideki Saito," Hideki replied, making a deep bow. "Hideki, huh? You lack any elegance," grunted the retired hero with contempt. "What do you mean?" Hideki asked, clearly confused and somewhat offended. "I mean how you act with me," the old hero said, moving closer, his penetrating eyes locked onto Hideki. "I saw you at the sports festival. You attack with aggression, with reckless violence. You try to dominate your opponents with a ferocity that almost makes it seem like you want to kill them, that is your own bloodlust, your own uncontrolled rage." Hideki looked at him, stunned, unable to process what he was hearing. "Your murderous intent is clumsy and disastrous. Do you think I would attack you? What you felt was nothing more than a reflection of your own fury," continued Vital Strike, his voice deep but firm. "Your own bloodlust turns against you, making you weak. What you displayed at the festival was not true strength, just uncontrolled brutality." Hideki frowned, still processing what the hero was saying. "That is not true strength," Vital Strike said harshly. "You're only clumsy and disastrous when you allow your bloodlust to control you. If you want to be more than that, you must learn to master yourself before attempting to dominate others." Vital Strike taught him that combat was not just a matter of brute strength. "You're like a wild beast," he had once said. "You only think about dominating your opponent with power. That is not true strength. You are just clumsy and disastrous. True strength doesn't come solely from your physical abilities. It comes from inner serenity, from the balance between mind and body." During his time with him, Hideki learned that it wasn't just about improving his martial skills, but about finding harmony within himself. Vital Strike always insisted that a calm mind was as essential as a strong body, and that only when spirit and body were in sync could one unleash their full potential. The memory of Vital Strike resonated in Hideki's mind, almost as if the old hero were present, watching his progress. That moment in the dojo, the harsh yet sincere words, now held more meaning. He had spent so long focusing on brute strength that he had forgotten the most important lessons: balance, calmness, serenity. Now he understood those words better. He had been so focused on combat and aggression that he forgot that true strength was not just about physical power, but about balance and control. Hideki opened his eyes, his breathing more controlled now. He could feel the ki beginning to flow more consistently through his body. It was no longer a distant current, he now perceived its presence at different points within him. The tingling in his extremities was clearer, sharper, though still faint. "I feel it better now," he said quietly, almost as if he didn't want to break the calm surrounding him. "But it's hard to maintain control." Kaori, watching him in silence, nodded slowly. She had noticed a change in his breathing and posture, small signs that he was beginning to understand what she was trying to teach him. "You're making progress," she said gently. "But remember, ki is not something you control with force. It's about fluidity. You must allow it to align with your body and spirit." Hideki nodded, recalling Vital Strike's words. "It's not about imposing your will, but about connecting with the world." That lesson was still a barrier for him, but he was starting to glimpse what it meant. He took another deep breath, this time trying not to force anything, just to feel. Kaori stood up and walked slowly toward him. She stopped beside him and, with a kind gesture, indicated for him to extend his uninjured hand forward. "Close your eyes again. This time, try to feel the ki around you, not just within you," she instructed, her voice always calm and serene. "The world is filled with energy. If you can perceive it, you'll begin to understand what it means to harmonize with your surroundings. Hideki obeyed, closing his eyes and concentrating, searching for that connection he had only vaguely perceived until now. At first, everything remained dark and unclear. He only felt his own breath and the dull pain in his broken arm. But gradually, the atmosphere around him began to change. It was not a physical change, but a sensation, as if something invisible were surrounding him, like a gentle breeze barely brushing his skin. "I feel it," he murmured, almost surprised by what he was experiencing. "It's like a soft echo around me." "Exactly," Kaori replied, with a reassuring smile. "Ki not only flows within you but also through everything around you. With practice, you'll be able to guide that energy, tune into it, and use it to strengthen your body, mind, and spirit." Hideki remained still, focused on that sensation. It was as if the world around him had taken on a new dimension, something he had never noticed before. Yet still, he couldn't help but wonder how this would help him in real battles against foes far beyond his physical capabilities. "But how will this help me in a fight?" he asked, without opening his eyes. "I don't feel like this is making me stronger or faster. How am I supposed to face beings much more powerful than me with this?" Kaori watched him silently for a few seconds before responding. "Ki is not just for battle," she said calmly. "It's to maintain peace within yourself, even in the most chaotic moments. In combat, those who are driven by despair or anger are the ones who lose, because they have lost control. True strength doesn't always lie in being stronger or faster, but in knowing when to act and how to do so." Hideki reflected on those words. Perhaps that was the missing piece, the one he had always ignored in his pursuit of power. For him, strength had always been about overpowering others, surpassing his enemies through sheer determination and physical skill. But now he understood that he also had to learn to control himself. "We'll leave it here for today," Kaori suddenly commented, surprising Hideki, who was so focused on feeling his ki that he hadn't noticed her signal that the training was over. The abrupt interruption pulled him out of his concentration and caused him to stumble and fall to the ground. "HMHM," Kaori chuckled quietly upon seeing Hideki fall, a playful smile on her face. "Hee, you still have much to learn. You can't lose your focus so easily, ha ha ha." Hideki got up, a slight blush on his cheeks as he tried to hide his embarrassment. Kaori, although she was trying to suppress her laughter, had warmth in her eyes. "But yes, we'll leave it here for today," she finally said, regaining her composure. "It's getting late, and you should prepare to go to the academy. Training can be exhausting, but you also have responsibilities to attend to." Hideki nodded, still a bit flushed from the embarrassing moment. He dusted off his clothes and prepared to leave. "Thank you for today, Kaori-san," he said with a grateful smile. "I really appreciate everything you've taught me." Kaori gave him a warm smile and nodded. "You're welcome, Hideki. Keep practicing and remember what we've talked about. It's not just about strength, but also about connecting with yourself and the world. See you later." With one last smile, Kaori headed toward the restaurant door as Hideki prepared to leave. As he exited the restaurant, he couldn't help but reflect on the training session. Despite the fall and the unexpected interruption, he felt he had taken a small but significant step forward in his understanding of ki. He made his way to the academy with a clearer mind, aware that he still had a long journey ahead. But with each step, he felt he was closer to balancing his inner and outer strength, an important lesson not just in learning to control ki, but in discovering his true purpose in this new world. The walk to the academy felt unusually quick and pleasant. Although he was no longer focused on feeling his ki, he noticed that his body had begun to adapt to the changes. His senses had sharpened subtly, allowing him to perceive his surroundings with renewed clarity. The breeze on his skin, the distant murmur of the city, and even the slight crunch of leaves underfoot seemed more vivid. His mind also felt calmer, a state of tranquility he hadn't experienced in a long time. A small smile crept across his face as he walked, feeling a light optimism for the first time since he arrived in this world. Upon arriving at the academy, Hideki quickly made his way to his classroom, aware that he was a little late. He entered just in time for the start of the lesson, breathing a sigh of relief. Despite the rush, his mind was in an unusually serene state, a remnant of his training with Kaori. During class, Hideki appeared strangely distracted to his classmates. He maintained a slight smile on his face, his eyes often closed in an expression of calm that contrasted with his usual seriousness. His classmates had never seen him like this before, and for the girls, this new expression of tranquility and the gentle smile on his face made him seem even more attractive. As the teacher explained the day's topic, Hideki tried to engage with the class actively, but he couldn't help but let his thoughts drift to the flow of his ki. He decided that instead of merely attending the class, he would use this time to practice his concentration on ki in a clever way. He focused on feeling the flow of energy within him while attempting to pay attention to the lessons. He closed his eyes for brief moments, feeling how the ki moved gently within his body, almost like a current intertwining with his breath. The sensation of the flowing energy became a mental exercise that helped him keep his mind focused, despite the distractions of his environment. Although maintaining concentration on ki required constant effort, Hideki felt a deep satisfaction in integrating this practice into his daily routine. Every moment, even the most mundane, became an opportunity to progress in his learning journey. The class, while not particularly challenging in terms of content, had transformed into a mental training ground for him. In fact, Hideki had lost his concentration a total of 113 times during class and had taken the time to note each of those occasions. This meticulous record reflected his dedication and effort to improve. Finally, lunchtime arrived. Many girls approached Hideki, drawn by his new attitude. During the break, his unusual behavior in class had caught the attention of his peers, and now, surrounded by a group of curious girls wanting to talk to him, Hideki felt both overwhelmed and flattered. "Your attitude is so different today. What happened to you?" asked one of the girls, her curiosity evident. "Oh, I've just been taking care of some things," Hideki replied, trying not to reveal too much. The truth was that the tranquility he felt was a direct result of his recent practice and the new perspective he had gained about his situation in this world. Somewhat overwhelmed by the attention he was receiving and the fact that he hadn't eaten lunch yet, Hideki quickly left the classroom to avoid being followed. He headed to his usual spot to eat, a tree a little distance away from the classrooms. There, he leaned against the trunk, trying to regain some tranquility. However, when he opened his backpack to get his lunch, he realized he had forgotten to prepare it. The morning training with Kaori had made him overlook one of the most important details. Disheartened, he thought about going to the cafeteria, but immediately dismissed the idea. At that moment, the cafeteria would be filled with students in a kind of free-for-all over lunches. He sighed in resignation and leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes in a desperate attempt to distract himself from his hunger while focusing on his ki. It was at that moment that he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Kaneko Tuja walking toward him. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and concern as she saw him there, alone under the tree. "Hideki-senpai, what are you doing here by yourself?" Kaneko asked, noticing his resigned expression. "Oh, Kaneko," said Hideki, smiling weakly. "I forgot my lunch and didn't want to face the battle in the cafeteria, so I came here to rest a bit." Kaneko raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the situation. She approached and sat down next to him. "If you're hungry, you should come with me," suggested Kaneko. "I have some food I can share." Hideki was taken aback by the gesture and looked at Kaneko with gratitude. Although his stomach growled from hunger, his smile widened at Kaneko's kindness. "I don't want to cause you any trouble," Hideki said, trying to decline the offer. "It's not a problem," Kaneko insisted. "Besides, it's more fun to eat together." With a small smile, Hideki accepted and stood up. Kaneko took a small lunchbox from her backpack and offered it to him. Together, they headed to a quiet corner near a tree, where they sat and began to share the food. As they ate, Kaneko chatted animatedly, helping Hideki relax and enjoy the moment. "Thank you, Kaneko," Hideki said, taking a bite of the food she had offered. "I really needed this." "You're welcome," Kaneko replied with a smile. Sometimes, sharing a good lunch is just what you need to feel better. As the conversation continued, Hideki realized how important these little moments of connection and support were. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, he felt grateful for the people by his side in this new world, and for the simple moments that could offer him comfort and companionship. While they shared the food, Kaneko noticed a faint smile on Hideki's face, something she hadn't seen before, at least not so casually. The expression of relaxation and the way he enjoyed the lunch seemed to indicate that he was happier and at peace. Hideki-senpai, Kaneko began curiously. You seem more relaxed today. Has something changed? Hideki looked at Kaneko, surprised by her observation. He realized that his positive mood hadn't gone unnoticed, even by his classmates. Although he had been lost in thought and training, he hadn't noticed how much his mood had shifted. Well, Hideki said, taking a sip of his drink. I'm just enjoying the day and what I'm learning. His tone tried to be moderate, but he couldn't hide the glimmer of excitement in his eyes. Today I was able to remember many things my teacher taught me. It's surprising how sometimes we can forget important lessons, but today's training was really special. Your teacher? Kaneko asked, intrigued. Do you practice any sports, Hideki-senpai? Ah, right, you don't know, Hideki replied with a smile. Since I was little, I've been practicing martial arts. About 2 years ago, I met Ryu-sensei, who taught me many valuable things. For personal reasons, I had to move to the city, he continued, pausing as he searched for a way to say he could no longer return to his teacher. Today, while I was training, I remembered many of those teachings. Kaneko looked at him attentively, interested in the story behind his training and its impact on him. The conversation flowed naturally, allowing Hideki to share a piece of his past while strengthening his connection with Kaneko. Kaneko, intrigued, tilted her head slightly. It must have been very important to you, she commented, a mix of curiosity and empathy in her voice. It's impressive how what we learn in the past can influence our present so much. Hideki nodded, his eyes reflecting a hint of nostalgia. Yes, it definitely is. Sometimes, when I feel lost or confused, remembering those moments and teachings helps me find my way again, although it might take me some time to remember. Ha ha ha, he laughed joyfully, a bit embarrassed admitting he had forgotten certain things about his training and struggled to recall them. Kaneko smiled at him in understanding. Tell me, what was your teacher like? She asked, genuinely interested. Ryu-sensei was a wise and very strict man, direct in his words, Hideki replied with a small laugh, recalling how they met. When I met him, we hadn't even spoken yet, and he had already pointed out all my mistakes. And I must admit he was right about everything, haha. That sounds very comforting. I'm glad to see you finding something that makes you feel better. We all need those moments of clarity. Hideki returned her smile, appreciating Kaneko's support. Thank you so much, Kaneko. And speaking of support, I'm glad to have a friend like you to share these moments with. Kaneko blushed slightly, looking down before responding. It's nothing, Hideki-senpai. I'm happy to be here for you. If you ever need to talk or someone to trust, I'm here. Hideki felt warmth in his chest at Kaneko's words. He realized how valuable her presence was in his life, especially in such an unknown world. I really appreciate it, Hideki said sincerely. And the same goes for you. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to tell me. The silence was filled with a comfortable tranquility, and Hideki leaned back a bit against the tree, enjoying the moment of peace. Without thinking too much, Hideki stretched out his hand toward Kaneko's head, intending to pet her. At first, she didn't seem to notice, but upon feeling his hand brush her hair, she instinctively pulled away, avoiding his touch completely. Ah! I'm so sorry, Kaneko. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. Hideki immediately apologized, a mix of surprise and regret in his voice. I'd better go, forgive me, Kaneko. He was about to stand up and leave, fearing he had crossed a boundary. However, before he could do so, Kaneko gently took his hand, her face turned away as if she wanted to hide something. No, it's not that, Hideki-senpai. It was just very sudden, and Kaneko whispered, her fingers tightening a bit more around Hideki's hand. Feeling her touch, Kaneko noticed how rough and calloused his hands were from years of training. And I didn't expect Senpai's hand to be so worn, she murmured, still avoiding looking directly at him. Hideki was surprised by Kaneko's reaction and her unexpected comment. Well, I guess it's the result of my training, he replied with a small nervous laugh, not pulling his hand away. Though I don't think it's something to admire. Kaneko gently shook her head, finally looking up to meet his gaze briefly. That's not true. It says a lot about how hard you work, she said, almost in a whisper, before releasing his hand delicately. After a brief moment of silence, Kaneko took a breath, trying to look directly at him this time, even though her eyes darted away whenever they met Hideki's. If you want, you can try again, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she lowered her head slightly, giving him access. Hideki blinked in surprise but smiled warmly before raising his hand once more. Gently and tenderly, he caressed Kaneko's hair, enjoying its softness while she remained still. Kaneko slowly closed her eyes, relaxing under Hideki's touch. Your hand isn't as rough as I thought, she said, her tone more tranquil. As she felt the caresses, Kaneko couldn't help but think, Senpai's hand is very large and warm, it feels safe. Hideki let out a small laugh, withdrawing his hand after a moment. Thank you for everything, Kaneko, he said sincerely, appreciating the trust she had shown him. Kaneko nodded silently, her face slightly flushed but a small smile appearing on her lips. The moment was brief, but charged with a deeper connection between them. Finally, Kaneko glanced at the clock and stood up. It's time to return to class. I don't want us to be late, she said softly. Yes, you're right, Hideki replied, also standing up. Let's go. Together, they walked back to the academy, each carrying with them a new understanding of the trust and bond they shared. By the end of the day, Hideki felt satisfied with his ability to balance his concentration on ki with his attention in class. The combination of practice and learning was providing him a new perspective on how to face challenges. The conversation with Kaneko had been a comforting moment that accentuated that feeling of well-being. As he headed to his next class, the smile on his face remained, a reflection of the inner peace he had begun to find amidst his efforts to adapt to his new world. The connection he had made with Kaneko and the progress in his training gave him a renewed sense of purpose and calm, making the day, despite its difficulties, end on a note of hope and satisfaction. Kaneko entered the Occult Club room with a small smile on her face. As always, Rias and Aquino were already there. The albino sat on one of the sofas and began eating her sweets accompanied by tea. Noticing Kaneko's unusually cheerful demeanor, Aquino approached with a mischievous expression on her face. Wow, Kaneko, you seem to be in a really good mood today, Aquino said, grinning playfully. Has someone been giving you reasons to smile? Kaneko looked up from her tea, her expression slightly flushed but maintaining her calm. It's nothing in particular, she replied, trying to keep the conversation neutral. I've just had a good day. Rias, observing the interaction with interest, decided to intervene to change the focus. Aquino, don't be so inquisitive, Rias said, her tone softer. Kaneko has the right to enjoy her day without being interrogated. Aquino made a disappointed face but backed off with a playful smile. All right. I'm just happy to see Kaneko so cheerful, she said as she returned to her seat. Rias looked at Kaneko with an understanding expression. I'm glad to see you so lively, Kaneko. Did something exciting happen today? Kaneko nodded slightly, her smile growing a bit. Yes, I had a good conversation with Hideki-senpai. I had always sensed some sadness in him, but today I saw him much happier and relaxed. Rias nodded, her gaze reflecting understanding. That's good to hear. Sometimes, finding little joys and connections in a new environment can make a big difference. The group continued chatting, with the atmosphere relaxed and the conversation flowing between various topics. As Kaneko enjoyed her time in the club, she was so happy that she forgot to mention to Rias that she had noticed an increase in Hideki's aura, sensing how his ki had become more present. A week had passed, and thanks to Kaori's magic abilities, Hideki had fully recovered from his broken arm. At that moment, they were in the middle of a training session. I can see how much your perception of ki has improved, Hideki, Kaori remarked, noticing that he could now maintain concentration on his own ki even during his daily activities. Thank you very much, Kaori-san. It's all thanks to your teachings, Hideki replied with a slight bow. Now that you've finally managed to keep your concentration on ki consistently, it's time to learn how to direct it, Kaori said as she stood up and assumed a combat stance, indicating for Hideki to do the same. Ki can enhance your strength, speed, and even endurance, but first you need to channel it correctly. Use your arm to give it a try. Pay attention to the internal flow of your ki, Kaori added, preparing for the practice. Hideki stood up, took a deep breath, and tried to reconnect with the energy he had sensed before. He moved slowly, raising his arm to throw a punch, but Kaori easily dodged it. Try again. Slower. Feel how the ki moves within you, Kaori said calmly. Hideki attempted again, focusing on visualizing the energy flowing from his center to his arm. This time, his strike was more controlled, but Kaori blocked it effortlessly, nodding in approval. Better. You're starting to use your ki, but you still need more control, she commented. Remember, ki is not just strength. It's a balance between body and mind. You must allow your ki to flow freely, without restrictions. Hours passed as they trained, with Kaori guiding Hideki to concentrate on his breathing and that internal connection. Although he was still far from mastering the technique, Hideki noticed a difference in his movements. They were becoming more fluid and precise. Finally, Kaori stopped and smiled at him. That's enough for today. You've made good progress, she said while offering him a bottle of water. Hideki, sweaty and exhausted, gratefully took the bottle from Kaori. This is harder than I imagined, he admitted between gasps, still recovering from the effort. That's normal, Kaori replied with a calm smile as she sat beside him. Mastering ki and tuki isn't something you achieve in a day. But you have potential. Your years of physical training give you an advantage, you just need to be patient. Hideki took a sip of water and looked up at the sky, his mind wandering as his thoughts mixed. Since arriving in this world he had made progress, but the road ahead still felt endless and full of challenges. He stammered, struggling to find the right words. Noticing his hesitation, Kaori looked at him with concern. What's wrong, Hideki? She asked gently. Before you found me, I didn't know if I wanted to go on, if I even had a reason to keep living, he confessed, his voice tinged with deep melancholy. I felt powerless, as if everything I did was meaningless. A silence filled with emotion stretched between them as Kaori gave him space to express himself. But then after I was given a home, after I was offered care, he continued, pausing as he sought the right way to express what he truly felt. I decided I wanted to keep living. You all gave me a reason to do so. Hideki looked down for a moment before adding, what I mean is I'm very grateful to you. Without you, I'd probably be dead by now. Kaori looked at him tenderly, understanding the weight of his confession. She remained silent for a few seconds, allowing Hideki's words to linger in the air, full of meaning. She recalled the state in which she had found him, emaciated from lack of food, covered in dirt after weeks without a place to wash, dressed in tattered and worn clothes. That day, seeing him so vulnerable, she understood that this young man had endured trials that would have broken anyone. Hideki, she finally said, her voice warm. I'm glad you found a reason to move forward. No matter how dark the path may be, there will always be light if we choose to seek it. And remember, you don't have to walk it alone. Hideki looked at her, his eyes glistening slightly. He wasn't used to sharing those thoughts, to being vulnerable, but something about the way Kaori treated him made him feel safe, as if for the first time in a long while, he didn't have to carry everything alone. Thank you, Kaori-san, he said, his voice firmer. I don't know how I can repay you for everything you've done for me, but I want to try. I want to become stronger, not just for myself, but to protect the home you've given me. Kaori smiled tenderly. You don't need to repay us. The fact that you're moving forward, that you're here, is enough. And if protecting this home is what motivates you, then use that feeling to keep pushing forward. True power doesn't always come from being the strongest, but from protecting what you love. Hideki nodded, feeling the weight of his emotions lift a little. His thoughts were still disordered, but now he had a clearer purpose. Life had given him another chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. All right, he finally said, a new determination shining in his eyes. I'll keep training. Not just for myself, but for all of you. Kaori gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder, her smile full of approval. That's the attitude you need. Now, let's rest for a bit. Tomorrow will be another day of training, but today, you've already made great strides. With that, they fell into silence, enjoying the moment under the sky, with Hideki feeling that, little by little, his path was clearing. The night was cold, and the rain pounded the ground with force, a constant thunder that seemed to synchronize with the tension in the air. At the top of a building, the figure of a man stood still, as if he were part of the night itself. His deep voice broke the silence. I am vengeance. The echo of those words resonated in the darkness. The rain didn't stop, and a lightning bolt briefly illuminated the horizon, casting his imposing silhouette against the stormy sky. I am the knight. Crocaboom! A nearby lightning strike lit up the scene, revealing for a moment the details of his outfit, a light armor of modern design, decorated with dark blue patterns that glowed faintly under the rain. The man, in a defiant pose, let out his climax. I am Batman! He seemed ready to vanish into the night, his posture reflecting determination and an air of mystery, but then, suddenly, wahahoho! The same voice, which moments ago had been deep and intimidating, transformed into genuine laughter. The man leaned slightly forward, holding his sides as he laughed heartily, his laughter completely out of sync with the dramatic tone from before. Ha! I always wanted to do that, he murmured to himself, still laughing. He took a few steps forward, and the dim light from a nearby street lamp illuminated his face, partially covered by a mask. Although it wasn't immediately obvious, anyone who knew him would recognize him. Hideki. With a satisfied smile, he let out a sigh, as if he just fulfilled a childhood wish. And so, in the middle of the storm, the hero without powers but with infinite determination continued on his way, his laughter still vibrating in the air. With renewed determination, Hideki descended from the building, his movements extremely agile, like those of a professional parkourist, if not better. The decision was made: if he wanted to be a true hero, he had to be one, no matter what world he was in. He had no quirk, but he had his will, his training, and a firm desire to help others. The city seemed quiet, or at least, it appeared that way. He walked through the dark streets, under the intermittent glow of streetlights and the constant tapping of rain, attentive to any sign of danger. It didn't take long for him to find it. A scream broke the calm. Stop! Please don't take my purse! Hideki quickly turned toward the direction of the scream. A few meters away, a woman struggled to hold onto her purse while a hooded man pulled at it with force. Another individual was nearby, watching the surroundings, clearly an accomplice. Without thinking, Hideki rushed to the scene. Hey! Leave her alone. The two thieves turned toward him. One of them let out a sarcastic laugh. And who are you? A kid playing hero? Hideki wasted no time. With a swift movement, he positioned himself defensively, his feet firm on the slippery ground from the rain. The training of the past weeks was starting to pay off, and this was his first real opportunity to put it to the test. The first thief, the more muscular one, charged at him, confident in his physical advantage. But Hideki had spent hours perfecting his technique, not to mention his previous fights in his world. He easily dodged the first punch, using the attacker's momentum to push him into a nearby pole. The other thief tried to attack from behind, but Hideki sensed him in time. A quick turn, and with a precise blow to the wrist, he made the thief drop the knife he had pulled out. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Hideki disarmed him completely, and shoved him to the ground, immobilizing him with a hold he'd learned. As he held the second thief on the ground, a thought crossed his mind: these thieves are nothing compared to the ones from my world. Even the most common criminal back there would be 10 or 20 times more dangerous than these two. He remembered how, in his world, criminals often had supernatural abilities or lethal quirks. Here, on the other hand, these men relied more on intimidation than their actual fighting ability or capacity for harm. Here, it seems most people neither have the intention nor the means to be truly violent, at least not in any serious way. He took a deep breath and loosened his grip slightly. Even though these thieves weren't a challenge in terms of skill, he knew he couldn't completely underestimate them. Making sure both were fully subdued, he stood up and moved away. I don't know what you thought you'd find tonight, but you made a big mistake, Hideki said, his voice filled with determination. The first thief tried to get up, but Hideki, staying alert, stopped him with a kick that made him fall again. Taking out his phone, he quickly dialed the police, making sure both criminals were under control while he spoke. I've stopped a robbery attempt in the Central District. 2 suspects are under control. Please send someone. The woman, still in shock, walked up, hugging her purse. Thank you, I don't know what I would have done without you. It's fine, ma'am. The police are on their way. Stay close, they'll prioritize your statement. The thieves, realizing they couldn't escape, stayed on the ground, resigned. Hideki didn't take his eyes off them for a second, making sure they didn't try anything. Minutes later, The red and blue lights illuminated the street, and 2 officers got out of a patrol car. Hideki briefly explained the situation, while the woman confirmed his story. Before they left, one of the officers turned to him, with a mix of gratitude and caution in his voice. "Thanks for stepping in. But be careful. Not all these encounters end so well." The officer stepped forward to make sure the young man had heard, but as he fully turned toward where Hideki was, he realized something. "Huh! Where did he go?" Another officer, who had also been watching, blinked in disbelief. Even the woman, who had been staring at her savior, was surprised. He had vanished the moment she blinked. "He was just here a second ago." Both officers looked around, trying to spot him, but Hideki had already disappeared, as if he had vanished into the rain and shadows of the night. From the top of a nearby building, hidden in the shadows, Hideki watched as the police took the thieves away. A small smile crossed his face before he disappeared again, leaving only the night and the distant echo of sirens behind. One step at a time, Hideki. One step at a time, he thought as he disappeared into the shadows, the rain gently falling on him. Days later, the routine of the city of Kuoh was interrupted by a local news program. On the screens of televisions in stores, cafes, and homes, the face of a reporter spoke enthusiastically, while blurry images and videos taken from mobile phones played in the background. Breaking news: a mysterious vigilante has begun appearing on the streets of Kuoh. Witnesses claim he has intervened in several robbery attempts over the past few nights, subduing the criminals with impressive skill before disappearing without a trace. The video showed grainy images of 2 men handcuffed to a pole, while police officers spoke to each other. Another video captured a shadow leaping from one building to another, barely visible under the dim light of streetlights. While some residents expressed their gratitude for what they describe as an anonymous hero, others warn about the dangers of relying on a vigilante outside the law. Authorities have not yet issued an official statement about this vigilante, but it is speculated that he could be a martial arts expert or someone with military training. In the Nishimiya household's dining room, Hideki watched the news with apparent indifference, sitting next to Hiro, who was enjoying a bowl of cereal while watching the screen, fascinated. "Wow, Mom! Look at that! It's just like in the comics! A real hero!" Hiro excitedly pointed at the TV. Kaori, meanwhile, watched Hideki from the corner of her eye, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. "An anonymous hero, huh?" she said in a tone that combined curiosity and suspicion. Feeling Kaori's penetrating gaze, Hideki tried to appear relaxed as he took a sip of tea. "Yeah, interesting, right? Must be someone with a lot of free time." Kaori kept her gaze on him for a few more seconds before letting out a sigh. "I hope that someone knows what they're doing. It wouldn't be good if they ended up getting into bigger trouble." As Kaori returned to the kitchen, murmuring something about how some young people could be too impulsive, Hideki let out a small sigh of relief. Hiro, however, was still talking excitedly. "I want to meet him. Do you think we could see him one day? I'd ask him how he learned to jump so high." Hideki ruffled Hiro's hair with a smile. "Maybe one day, little one. Maybe one day." However, as he said those words, he couldn't help but wonder how long he could keep his identity a secret. We have breaking news coming from downtown, where a large-scale fire is ravaging an apartment building. We're live with our reporter on the scene, Tanaka Yuki, who has all the details. "Tanaka, what's happening?" A middle-aged man in the studio of the local news channel spoke through the television. The camera switches to Tanaka Yuki, her face illuminated by the intermittent red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. Behind her, the building is engulfed in black smoke, with visible flames on the upper floors. "Thank you, Fujimoto. The situation here is critical. The flames have completely consumed the upper floors of this 8-story building, and emergency teams are fighting not only the fire but also time. According to authorities, at least 3 people are still trapped on the upper floors, where the flames are most intense, and the smoke is making any rescue attempts extremely difficult." The camera zooms in on the 5th floor, where a woman is waving a sheet from the window, shouting for help. The fire is dangerously close, and the screams of trapped residents are audible. Right now, firefighters are trying to reach the 5th and 6th floors, where people are still trapped. However, access is extremely dangerous, and every second counts. The tension here is palpable. Suddenly, the camera captures a young man with dark hair and a determined look crossing the safety line established by the firefighters. It's Hideki, his clothes drenched with water from a hose he borrowed to shield himself from the heat. Fujimoto, it looks like someone is trying to enter the building. Wait a minute! That man isn't part of the rescue team. Wait, he's a teenager. The camera follows him as he dodges firefighters and enters the building through a window on the first floor, ignoring the orders from emergency officials. Hey kid! It's dangerous. Get back right now. What we're seeing is both incredible and alarming. This man, apparently a civilian, has entered the building to try and rescue the trapped people. We don't know who he is or what his intentions are, but he's clearly determined to help. The camera switches to the upper floors, where the smoke is growing thicker. Minutes later, between the blackened windows, Hideki appears, carrying a woman and a child in his arms. His face is covered in sweat and soot, but his movements are steady. Something is coming out of the third floor. Someone shouted. It's the young man from earlier. Wait, he's going to jump. Hideki didn't hesitate. Holding the woman and child firmly, he leaped outside, aiming for the inflatable mattress that firefighters had set up at the base of the building. The firefighters catch the mother and child in their arms, both unconscious. However, Hideki doesn't stop and re-enters the building, ignoring the warnings from the firefighters. Fujimoto, this is something we don't see every day. This young man is risking his life to save those trapped. However, the situation remains extremely dangerous. We don't know how much longer the building's structure can withstand. The flames are advancing to the 6th floor, and the ceiling begins to creak. A firefighter grabs the reporter's microphone and speaks directly to the camera. We ask that young man to come out immediately. The building is about to collapse, it's too risky. Moments earlier, Hideki was walking calmly through the city. With nothing urgent to attend to, he had decided to take some time to relax and let his mind wander. However, his peace was interrupted when he noticed people running in panic, their faces filled with terror. Looking up, his heart skipped a beat. A huge column of black smoke was rising above the buildings. Without a second thought, Hideki began running towards the smoke, the sound of sirens growing louder with each step. When he reached the scene, it was devastating. An 8-story building was engulfed in flames, with fire and smoke pouring out from the upper floor's windows. Near the safety perimeter, Hideki spotted a reporter speaking live in front of the cameras. He decided to approach to gather more information. Thank you, Fujimoto. The situation here is critical. The flames have completely consumed the upper floors of this 6-story building, and the emergency teams are fighting not only the fire but also time. According to authorities, at least 6 people remain trapped on the upper floors, where conditions are extremely dangerous due to the heat and smoke, the reporter said, her expression serious. Those words were all Hideki needed to hear. The situation was urgent, and there was no time for doubts or preparations. He couldn't afford to go look for his hero's suit, or waste a single second more. With quick movements, he took off his jacket and tied it around his head, covering his nose and mouth to protect himself from the smoke. Hey you! Stop! A firefighter shouted, noticing his intentions. Someone stop that guy! Another shouted, as several rescuers tried to intercept him. But Hideki, with impressive agility, dodged them without stopping, moving between them as if he could predict their movements. Every step he took brought him closer to the burning building. As he ran, his mind was focused on a single goal: to save the trapped people, regardless of the risk. The heat and the roar of the flames were intimidating, but Hideki didn't hesitate. He knew that every second counted, and he couldn't afford to fail. Once inside the building, Hideki started shouting on every floor, making sure no one was left behind. He knew he couldn't fully trust the reporter's words and wanted to personally ensure no one was trapped on the lower levels. He searched each apartment as quickly as he could, thoroughly checking every corner. Fortunately, the first 4 floors were empty. Without wasting time, he continued climbing. Upon reaching the 5th floor, a barely audible sound stopped him in his tracks. Help! The voice was weak, almost drowned out by the roar of the flames and the creaking of the building. Is anyone here? Hideki shouted, trying to locate the source of the cry. Here, cough, cough. The sound, now clearer, was accompanied by a desperate cough. Hideki quickly moved toward where he thought he had heard the voice. He entered one of the apartments and, after a quick glance, saw a woman trapped under a wooden piece of furniture that was partially on fire. Without hesitation, he ran toward her. "Hang in there. I'll get you out of here." Ignoring the heat and danger, Hideki grabbed the heavy piece of furniture, his muscles tensing as he lifted it effortlessly. With a swift twist, he threw it against the wall, which cracked on impact. When he finally reached the woman, he saw she was holding a baby tightly, protecting it with her body. "Don't worry, you're safe now," he told her as he carefully carried her and the baby. With both in his arms, Hideki began descending the stairs. But upon reaching the third floor, he realized that time was against him. The fire was spreading rapidly, and the stairs were beginning to weaken under his feet. He knew he couldn't risk getting trapped with the woman and the baby. Making a risky decision, but confident in his recent training with Ki, he headed for the nearest window. Outside, amidst the chaos, reporter Tanaka spotted him. "Something is coming out of the third floor," she shouted. "It's the young man from earlier." "Wait, he's going to jump." Hideki didn't hesitate. Holding the woman and the baby firmly, he took a deep breath to concentrate his ki. In one fluid movement, he leaped outside, aiming to land on the ground. Fortunately, there was an inflatable mattress that the firefighters had prepared at the base of the building, and he managed to land on it with relative ease. The firefighters received the mother and baby, both unconscious from inhaling smoke. Hideki, aware that there were still people trapped inside the building, didn't hesitate to go back. "Wait, young man! You've already done enough!" one of the firefighters shouted, extending his arm to stop him. "There are still people inside," Hideki replied, dodging the firefighter without stopping. "Have the mattress ready." Once again, Hideki ran through the flames and smoke to reach the building's interior. He quickly climbed to the 6th floor, trying to ignore the increasing heat and the thickening air. "Is anyone here?" he shouted, hoping for a response. When he got no answer, he checked every apartment as quickly as he could before continuing to the 7th floor. He shouted the same question, but once again, only the sound of the fire responded. However, when he entered one of the apartments, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A large chunk of ceiling had fallen onto the floor, and a barely visible hand was sticking out. Fear gripped him for a moment. He hurried toward the debris and noticed the hand was moving weakly. "Help!" A faint, almost inaudible voice reached his ears. It was a man's voice. "Hang on! I'll get you out of here!" Hideki shouted, trying to keep the man conscious. As he tried to lift the debris, the man murmured between coughs, "My daughter, save her." Hideki gritted his teeth and redoubled his efforts, managing to lift the heavy chunk of ceiling just a bit more. But it wasn't enough. More debris stacked on top of the ceiling was exerting too much pressure. Suddenly, an ominous creaking filled the room. Crack! The sound of the debris cracking made Hideki stop instinctively. If it broke, there would be no way to save the man and his daughter, and both would be buried. The smoke grew thicker with every breath, burning his lungs. His muscles trembled under the strain, exhausted from the effort, as the fire began to draw dangerously closer. The situation worsened with each passing second, but at that moment, a desperate idea crossed his mind. He had no certainty that it would work. His mastery and knowledge of Ki were not enough to guarantee the success of his next move. However, there was no time to hesitate. Hideki closed his eyes and channeled his Ki, carefully extending it toward the piece of ceiling he was holding. He had never attempted something so precise before, but he had no other choice. His energy wrapped around the structure, strengthening and stabilizing it. "Hiya!" With a shout full of determination, Hideki exerted all the strength he had left, lifting the debris while maintaining the flow of Ki to stabilize the structure. With one free hand, he grabbed the man, who was still clutching his daughter, and dragged them out of the debris reach. Once they were safe, he let the heavy ceiling fall with a loud crash. He barely had time to breathe before making sure they were both out of harm's way. Hideki carried the injured man and his daughter in his arms, pressing them against his chest to protect them as he hurried down the stairs. Each step was a struggle against the blazing heat and the smoke, which made every breath feel heavier than the last. When he reached the 5th floor, his path was blocked by a sudden collapse. The flames were spreading quickly, licking the walls and floor, trapping him. Hideki assessed the situation. There was no time to go back. The only way out was the nearest window. "This can't be," he thought as he approached the window frame, looking down. The safety mattress the firefighters had prepared was there, but the height was considerable. His legs tensed, and doubt began to creep in. He had never jumped from so high with people in his arms. "Prepare the mattress!" Hideki shouted, making sure everyone was ready. The injured man coughed weakly. "No, don't let go," he whispered in barely a breath. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to calm his mind. He was at the edge of his endurance, but he couldn't fail now. "Hang on tight," he told them as he adjusted his grip and took a step back. He channeled what little ki he had left into his legs, reinforcing them to cushion the impact of the jump. "Here I go!" he exclaimed. With a powerful push, Hideki leaped through the window, holding tightly to both civilians as they fell toward the safety mattress. The air whistled in his ears, and for a moment, he felt time slow down. The impact was harsh, but the mattress absorbed most of the fall. Hideki rolled to make sure the man and his daughter didn't take any additional harm. When he finally stopped, he took a deep breath, feeling the solid ground beneath him. "He's alive!" "He got them to safety," one of the firefighters shouted, running toward them. The paramedics rushed to attend to the injured man and his daughter, who, though weak, were alive thanks to Hideki's efforts. He, still gasping for breath, collapsed onto his back on the mattress, looking up at the sky. "Are they okay?" he asked between heavy breaths. "They'll be fine thanks to you, kid," a firefighter said as he knelt to help him up. "You're a hero." Hideki shook his head as he stood up, swaying slightly. "I just did what I had to do." When Hideki got to his feet with Tanaka's help, a moment of silence took over the area. The air was thick with tension as everyone processed what had just happened. Then, a solitary applause broke the silence, followed by another and another. Within seconds, the crowd that had gathered in front of the building erupted into deafening cheers and applause. "He's a hero!" someone in the crowd shouted. "He saved that family. I can't believe it. He jumped from that height with them in his arms." The cheers intensified as the reporters' cameras captured every angle of the moment. Some even approached with microphones in hand, trying to get a statement from the young man who had risked his life. Hideki, however, barely heard any of it. His heart was still pounding, not from the applause, but from the relief of having saved those people. He looked up at the burning building, concerned that there might still be someone trapped inside. A firefighter, noticing his expression, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, kid. No one else is inside." The firefighter's words gave him a small sense of calm, though exhaustion was beginning to catch up with him. "Thank you?" a woman shouted from the crowd, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saving my husband and my daughter." Hideki turned his head and saw the woman running toward him. Her face was full of gratitude as the paramedics attended to her family. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply in respect. "There's no need to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe," he said humbly, though his voice was weak from exhaustion. The cheers continued, and although Hideki wasn't seeking recognition, the warmth of the crowd gave him a sense of comfort amid the chaos. As the applause began to fade and the firefighters resumed their work, Hideki moved away from the crowd, seeking a bit of peace. He found a quiet corner near an ambulance, where he collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily as he leaned his back against the cold metal structure. Every muscle in his body ached, and exhaustion enveloped him like a heavy blanket. Despite saving those people, an inexplicable feeling of discomfort crept over him. He had done what he had to do, yes, but there was something deeper that he couldn't identify. "I did it, but is it enough?" he wondered, though he knew the answer was clear inside him. Today, he had faced fire and chaos without regard for the risks, saving lives that were about to be lost. That, in his own eyes, was what a hero would do. "I think this is what it means to be a hero," he thought with a faint smile. However, he didn't feel like a hero because he hadn't fully understood it yet. Being a hero wasn't just about saving lives, it was about making risky decisions, moving forward when others stayed behind. And above all, it was a constant commitment to improve, to keep going no matter the scars one might have. He remembered the words of the man he had rescued, "My daughter, save her." That had given him a purpose beyond any reward or recognition. He didn't do it to be admired, he did it because it was the right thing, because every life saved was worth more than any personal achievement. "I promise to be better. I'll keep going until no one is left trapped," until I can save everyone, he thought, with a determination stronger than before, knowing that his journey as a hero was just beginning. A paramedic approached, interrupting his thoughts. Are you okay, kid? You should let us check you out. Hideki gave a small smile and nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. Just give me a moment. As the paramedic walked away to bring a stretcher, Hideki closed his eyes once more. Despite the wounds and the exhaustion, Hideki already knew that this was just the first step. A true hero isn't measured by how many times they fall, but by how many times they rise, and today, he had taken a big step toward becoming the hero he had always wanted to be. After the fire incident, in the following days, Hideki continued with his nightly activities as a hero. His routine mostly involved thwarting small robberies or helping people in dangerous situations. Japan, and especially Kuoh, wasn't known for its high crime rates, which meant that most of his interventions were minor incidents. However, for Hideki, every action mattered, and every person he could help was another step toward his goal of becoming a true hero. However, he began to notice something unsettling. In the midst of his patrols, he spotted an alarming pattern of disappearances. Though initially isolated, they began to accumulate in his mind like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. People of all ages, mostly night workers, students, and passers-by, simply stopped showing up. The strangest thing was that almost none of these disappearances made the news or seemed to be a public concern. This raised a red flag for Hideki. One night, after saving a couple from a mugging, he decided to change the direction of his activities. This isn't normal, someone has to be doing something about this. And if no one else will, then I will. Hidden in the shadows of an alley, Hideki flipped through the small notebook where he had started jotting down details of the disappearances. He had gathered the information through casual conversations with merchants, social media reports, and small flyers posted on lampposts or community bulletin boards. The disappearances seemed to be concentrated in 3 specific areas of the city: near the train station, in a park to the east, and in an abandoned industrial zone. That very night he decided to visit the park, a desolate and silent place at these hours. His combat experience and training allowed him to stay alert to anything unusual, but it wasn't his skill that detected the first odd signal, it was his instinct. As he approached a dense thicket of bushes, he felt a slight chill run down his spine. He stopped and focused, sensing a faint but unmistakable trace of energy. This isn't human. He was deeply grateful that he had learned to use his ki, even if at the moment he could only use it at a basic level. Kneeling, he examined the ground more closely. There were subtle marks, as if something heavy had been dragged. He also found small patches of dark liquid that didn't seem to be blood, but its texture and shine under the moonlight were unsettling. This confirms my suspicions, something supernatural is behind this. As he walked through the empty streets, he felt a chill run down his back. This wasn't the first time he had sensed something strange, but this time the trace was clearer, sharper. He closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating on his surroundings. The sensation was still difficult to decipher with his current level of knowledge in ki and supernatural presences, but following his intuition and the feeling of the energy, he was fairly sure it was demonic energy. After all, he had already felt similar energies at the academy, and one of them belonged to his friend Kaneko. Deep inside, he refused to think of her as a demon. She might be a little cold toward others, but he knew she was a good person, so he couldn't even consider that she could be a demon. Shaking his head, he realized it wasn't the time to think about that. So this isn't the work of humans, he thought, his expression hardening. The trace led him down empty streets until he reached an old, crumbling building. It was an abandoned theater, covered in graffiti and with broken windows, a place that had fallen into neglect years ago. The demonic energy seemed to emanate from there, growing stronger as he got closer. Hidden in the shadows, Hideki studied the place. There were no signs of human activity, but the oppressive atmosphere of the location was undeniable. He moved cautiously, keeping all his senses alert. The main entrance was locked with a rusted padlock, but Hideki found a side access. A small door was slightly ajar, leading to what seemed to be a dark corridor. Inside, the atmosphere was cold and heavy, as if the air itself was charged with something unnatural. As he advanced, the marks of demonic energy became more evident. On the walls, the same claw marks he had seen in the park were etched, forming a pattern that looked like an incomplete seal. Every step he took convinced him more and more that he wasn't dealing with something ordinary. He investigated a bit more but found nothing. The biggest clue he had gathered were the claw marks and the demonic energy that was strongly concentrated in the place. I don't think the demon responsible for this will return soon. I'll come back tomorrow to investigate further. Hideki clenched his fists, his mind working quickly. He knew that facing a renegade demon would be a much greater challenge than the small criminals he had dealt with so far. Still, he couldn't allow more people to become victims. With that determination, Hideki began to inspect the place more thoroughly, planning his next steps to confront whatever was behind the disappearances. For now, his priority was to gather as much information as possible before the time came to face his enemy, Sona Shirtorai, president of the student council at the prestigious Kuoh Academy. A beautiful young woman with short black hair and violet eyes, known for keeping the institution in strict order. Her strict and demanding personality has earned her the respect, and even the fear, of both students and teachers alike. At first glance, Sona appears to be the perfect student, dedicated, disciplined, and fully focused on her studies and personal aspirations. And while all of the above is entirely true, the hidden truth about this girl is that she belongs to the proud race of demons and, on top of that, is the heir to one of the most important clans in the underworld, the Citri clan. With this in mind, it's deducible that the surname Shirtorai is merely a cover for her true nature, and her real name is Sona Citri. Since childhood, Sona has shared a close friendship with Rias Gremory. They support each other and are great rivals, sharing a natural competitiveness that drives them to constantly surpass themselves. However, there is a fundamental difference between them. While Rias seeks power, following the more traditional impulses of demon nature, Sona prefers to act with caution and strategy. This prudence has turned her into a brilliant strategist, able to deeply analyze her opponents and stay informed about everything happening around her, even if it is unrelated to the supernatural. It is precisely this strategic curiosity combined with the greedy nature of demons that catches Sona's attention towards a certain human teenager, who at first glance seems completely ordinary. "He's a hero!" came the excited shout from a voice in the news report. "He saved that family. I can't believe it. He jumped from that height with them in his arms." On the screen, a reporter announced enthusiastically, "This is truly impressive. A young teenager just rescued 4 people from a burning building when even the firefighters hesitated to enter due to the instability of the structure." According to witnesses, the young man jumped from the 5th floor carrying the victims in his arms. Without a doubt, it is an act of bravery and recklessness. The camera focused on the hero of the day, a young man with slightly long brown hair tied in a ponytail and blue eyes. His face and Kuoh Academy uniform were covered in soot, showing some minor burns. The reporter tried to approach him for an interview, but before she could speak to him, paramedics surrounded him to provide medical attention. Although his body showed signs of exhaustion due to the effort and smoke inhalation, his expression reflected an unwavering determination. As the dedicated president of the student council, known for her desire to keep everything in perfect order, Sona immediately identified the young man who had performed the heroic act that had captured everyone's attention. "Hideki Saito," she murmured to herself, as her mind replayed the few, though memorable, interactions she had had with him. Hideki was, on the surface, a completely normal human. She had never perceived any supernatural energy from him, and when she researched his profile when he enrolled at the academy, she found no signs of connection to the supernatural world. For this reason, Sona hadn't paid him much attention beyond what was necessary. However, she couldn't ignore certain details. He had entered the academy on a scholarship thanks to his hard work and dedication, and his grades placed him just below the best students at Kuoh. Specifically, he ranked 5th, behind Sona, Rias, Tsubaki, and Akino, in that order. Hideki was known for his good heart, always willing to help anyone in need, no matter who they were. On more than one occasion, Sona had heard her servant Tsubasa Yura mention how Hideki had helped her with simple tasks, like delivering documents to the student council room. This kindness had forged a small friendship between them, something Sona hadn't given much importance to. For her part, Sona's interactions with Hideki had been few and strictly related to academic or disciplinary matters. She especially remembered one occasion that, though insignificant, had turned out to be strangely memorable. Hideki had gotten lost in the academy during his first days, and when he happened to run into Sona, he asked for help finding his classroom. What was curious was that after walking through several hallways, Hideki hadn't realized they were right in front of the classroom he was looking for when he asked for directions. That anecdote brought a faint smile to her face as she recalled it. Although she had always considered him a normal guy, the recent events had sparked a new curiosity in Sona. What could motivate someone like him to risk so much for others? The next day at the academy, Hideki was surrounded by his classmates, who bombarded him with questions and congratulations, clearly impressed by his heroic act. "You're amazing, Hideki. Did you really jump from the 5th floor with those people in your arms?" asked a boy, his voice full of awe. "Weren't you scared the building would collapse?" added one of the girls, looking at him with wide eyes. "You should be a firefighter or something." Hideki, visibly uncomfortable with so much attention, raised a hand in an attempt to calm the crowd. "It wasn't that big of a deal, really," he responded modestly, scratching the back of his neck. His tone reflected more embarrassment than pride. "I just did what anyone would have done in that situation." "That's not true. Most people wouldn't have even entered the building, let alone jumped with other people on their backs," protested another student. Amidst the commotion, a familiar figure watched from a distance. Sona Shirtorai, accompanied by her loyal vice president Tsubaki Shinra, studied the boy attentively as she adjusted her glasses. "Tell me, Tsubaki, what can you sense from Hideki Saidakin?" Sona asked calmly while observing the boy from a prudent distance. She had considered approaching him and speaking directly about the events from the day before, but something about him caught her attention, something that hadn't been present before. Before acting, she decided to confirm her suspicions and test her queen's perception. Tsubaki took a moment to respond, slightly furrowing her brow as she analyzed the young man. "To be honest, Kaicho, I don't feel anything special about him," she finally replied, her tone serene but slightly confused. Sona kept her expression calm, although inside she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. She didn't entirely blame Tsubaki after all. What she had noticed wasn't something obvious. However, she had hoped her queen would show a greater level of perception. You still have a lot to learn," Tsubaki Sona commented, adjusting her glasses with an elegant gesture before revealing what she had discovered. "Surely, because of Hideki's human nature, you didn't notice. But he possesses quite powerful ki for just a human." Tsubaki's eyes widened slightly, surprised by her president's statement. "Ki? You mean the energy that yokai usually use?" she asked, intrigued. Sona nodded. "Exactly. As you know, any being, whether human or supernatural, has the ability to use ki. However, it is not common for humans to develop such strong ki, especially without proper training. Even among the supernatural, its use is not habitual. Beings like us generally prefer to rely on magic, which is more versatile and allows for a greater variety of strategies and attacks." Tsubaki absorbed the explanation, recalling exceptional figures like Serorg Baal, a demon who had mastered the use of ki due to his limited magical ability. Even so, it was even rarer to find humans with such mastery of this energy. "But what really catches my attention," Sona continued, her gaze fixed on Hideki as she spoke in a lower tone, "is that this amount of ki wasn't present in him a few weeks ago. And what's even more interesting, he's trying to hide it." Sona's calculated tone left Tsubaki thoughtful. If Hideki had developed such a significant amount of ki in such a short time, and was also trying to conceal it, it meant there was much more to him than met the eye. "Tsubaki, look for all the recent information on him. I want to review his history once more," Sona ordered calmly, as she headed back to her office. Hideki walked through the halls of Kuoh Academy with a stack of documents in his arms, barely managing to balance them while following Tsubasa Yura. The young girl, one of the members of the student council, was also carrying a large stack of papers, and seeing her, Hideki didn't hesitate to offer his help. "Thank you for the help, Saidakin. These documents are heavier than they look," Yura said, giving him a small smile. "No problem, Tsubasa-san. It's the least I can do. Besides, I was already on my way here," Hideki replied with his usual friendly tone. "And I've told you before, call me Hideki." "Of course, Hideki-san," she replied, with an almost imperceptible blush on her face. She really appreciated Hideki's help. When they arrived at the student council room door, Yura opened it to let him in. "You can leave them on that table," she said, pointing to an empty space near the main desk. Hideki nodded and walked over to the table, carefully placing the documents down. It was then that he noticed an unexpected presence. "Oh, Saito-kun. What a surprise to see you here." The firm and serene voice of Sona Shirtorai, the student council president, caught his attention. Hideki quickly straightened up, turning toward her with a slightly surprised expression. "Ah, Shitori Kaishu, sorry for the intrusion. I was just helping Tsubaseizen with these documents," he said, bowing slightly as a sign of respect. As he spoke, a peculiar feeling washed over him. This presence, I've felt it before, he thought, observing both Yura and Sona. Their auras are similar to what I sensed at the park yesterday. Is it possible they're demons too? Since Hideki had started developing his ability to sense supernatural presences through his ki, he'd realized that the academy was full of them. However, his inexperience still made it difficult to precisely identify who they belonged to unless he had the person directly in front of him. Sona observed him for a moment, adjusting her glasses with an elegant gesture. "It's not an intrusion if you're helping, Saito-kun," she responded with a polite tone, though her analytical gaze seemed to scan him completely. "It's good to see you willing to assist." However, she slowly approached, maintaining a flawless posture while watching him more closely. "Have you been well after the fire incident? After all, you missed 2 days. Hideki blinked, surprised by the question. "Are you referring to the fire?" "Yes, I'm fine. The paramedics checked me out and said there was nothing serious, just some minor burns." "Thank you for your concern, Shitori Kaishu," he replied with a slight smile. "I'm glad to hear that," Sona responded, though her tone remained measured and professional. "However, I can't help but wonder what made you act that way. Jumping from the 5th floor with a family in your arms is not something just anyone can do. It's admirable, but also risky." Hideki looked uncomfortable with the attention, scratching the back of his neck as he tried to respond. "Well, I didn't think much about it at the time. I just wanted to help. I couldn't stand by while someone was in danger," he said sincerely. Sona kept her gaze fixed on him, as though trying to decipher something beyond his words. "I see. That's an interesting response," she commented before turning to Yura. "Yura, thank you for the documents. You may leave. I will handle Saito-kun." Yura blinked, surprised by the decision, but said nothing and left the room, leaving Sona and Hideki alone. "Saito-kun, would you mind staying a few more minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss with you," Sona said, sitting at her desk and placing her hands on it. "Of course, Shitori-san. What is it about?" Sona watched him silently for a moment before speaking. "The act you performed yesterday was extraordinary. But I can't help but wonder, how did you manage something like that, being, as far as I know, a normal student? Is there something I should know, Saito-kun?" Hideki swallowed, feeling the intensity in Sona's violet eyes. Though the question sounded polite, it was also an indication that the president wouldn't let the matter go easily. Hideki remained silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. Sona's gaze was piercing, but not aggressive. She seemed more interested in understanding him than confronting him directly. "There's not much to tell, Shitori Kaishu," he said finally, scratching the back of his neck. "I just acted. I don't think it was anything extraordinary. I simply did what I felt was right." Sona watched him closely for a few more seconds before standing up from her seat. She walked over to a nearby shelf, where a perfectly arranged chessboard was placed. "Well, let's set that aside. Do you play chess, Saito-kun?" she asked, pulling the board out and placing it on the student council table. "Ah, well, a little. I used to play with my grandfather. He taught me when I was a kid, but I'm not very good," Hideki replied, eyeing the chessboard with curiosity. "By the way, Shitori Kaishu, please call me Hideki." "Perfect. Let's play a game while we talk and there won't be a problem, Hideki-kun," Sona said calmly as she set up the board. Hideki smiled upon noticing that the girl had no problem calling him by his name. Hideki sat across from her, still somewhat nervous about the situation, but grateful that the conversation wasn't too formal. "You start, Hideki-kun," Sona said, turning the board so that Hideki would play with the white pieces. Hideki moved a pawn forward, breaking the ice. "So what did you want to talk about, Shitori Kaishu?" Sona moved her pawn with precision and watched him with an inquisitive gaze, though not intimidating. Nothing complicated. I just wanted to know more about you. After all, we don't usually talk beyond academic matters. Where are you from, Hideki-kun? Hideki moved his knight thoughtfully. I'm from Osaka, in the Nara prefecture. Hideki recalled how Koori had helped him with the papers in this world, and when mentioning that he had spent some time in Osaka for training, she had chosen a nearby village for his registration. And what brought you to this academy? Hideki shrugged while Sona moved her bishop with precision. I wanted to take advantage of the scholarship. I've always been someone who tries to do my best, and when I had the opportunity to get in here, I didn't want to let it pass. Also, I heard the academy has an excellent level of education. Sona nodded, intrigued. That explains your grades. You're among the best students, and that's not easy to achieve, especially with this academy's demands. Do you have any goals for the future? Hideki sighed, moving his rook and getting lost in his thoughts for a moment. I guess I want to do something meaningful. I'm still not sure exactly what, but I want to help people, somehow. Sona smiled faintly, moving her queen and taking one of Hideki's pieces. That's a noble goal. Although, from what I've seen, you already help those around you. I've heard you offered to help Yura with some documents this morning, and this isn't the first time you've done something like that. Hideki laughed softly, slightly embarrassed. I just try to be helpful. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. Sona moved another piece and looked directly at him. Don't underestimate the importance of small acts, Hideki-kun. Sometimes, the simplest actions have a bigger impact than we imagine. Though a bit intimidated by her reflective tone, Hideki decided to shift the subject slightly. Are you always this good at chess, Shitori Kaishu? Let's just say I have a lot of practice, Sona replied with a slight smile. It's a good exercise for the mind. But back to you, how are you adjusting at the academy? Have you had any difficulties? Hideki moved a piece, clearly thinking about his answer. Well, at first it was hard. Coming from a small town to a place like this was a big change. But I've met kind people who have helped me. Yura, for example, is a great friend, even though we've only spoken a couple of times. Sona nodded, mentally noting his words. It's good to hear that. Maintaining good relationships is just as important as academic performance. The game continued for a few more minutes, with Sona clearly in the lead. Each of the president's calculated moves seemed to close door after door on the board. Despite his efforts, Hideki made mistakes that she exploited with precision. Tell me, Hideki-kun, what can you tell me about your parents? Sona asked casually, though her gaze seemed more inquisitive. Hideki let out a heavy sigh before responding, his expression turning more serious. The truth is, I don't know much about them. They abandoned me when I was 4. I was raised by an old man who adopted me shortly afterward. I always considered him my grandpa, though he's no longer with us. He had chosen to summarize his story, leaving out unnecessary details. Since he was no longer in his world, talking about his grandfather as someone who had passed away was easier than trying to explain his current situation. Sona listened in silence, her expression softening as she absorbed what he said. I understand. It must have been very difficult for you, losing the only family you had, she said with empathy. After a brief pause, she added, Have you never been curious about your biological parents? Hideki fell silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the board as he moved the bishop almost mechanically, leaving the king exposed. I can't deny that at first, I was curious, he finally admitted, but soon I realized they meant nothing to me. I stopped looking for them. His tone hardened as he said this, reflecting the mix of emotions he still harbored. He remembered when his biological parents had sought him out after the sports festival, wanting him to join their hero agency. The decision to ignore them had been painful, but necessary for him. Sona noticed the change in his tone and leaned slightly forward with an apologetic gesture. Sorry. That must have been a very delicate question. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, she said sincerely. Then, in an attempt to shift the topic, she continued cautiously, Can I know who you're living with now? Hideki looked up at her, clearly tired of the interrogation. He didn't feel that Sona was a bad person, but she was prying too much into his past. Plus, with the growing certainty that she was a demon, he decided he didn't want to share anymore. Excuse me, Shitori Kaishu, he said abruptly, standing up from his seat. I appreciate your hospitality, but I think I've taken up too much of your time. Sona blinked, surprised by his sudden reaction, but she showed no signs of annoyance. Instead, she smiled calmly and nodded. I understand, Hideki-kun. Thank you for joining me for the game. I hope we can talk again sometime. Hideki gave a slight bow before heading toward the door, feeling the weight of their conversation as he walked away. As he exited, he noticed that Yura was still waiting for him outside, apparently having finished her tasks. Is everything okay, Hideki-kun? She asked in a friendly tone. Yes, thank you for waiting for me, Tsubasa-san, he replied with a smile, as if the previous conversation had never happened. As they walked away from the student council room, Hideki couldn't shake the feeling that Sona knew more than she let on. His intuition told him that this wouldn't be the last time they spoke, and that he needed to prepare for more questions in the future. Inside the room, Sona stared at the chessboard, where her pieces were still perfectly arranged. She was just one move away from checkmate, but upon closer inspection, Hideki's last pawn was only one square from the enemy base. If it had become a queen, it would have left Sona in check. Not that it mattered much, as the next turn was hers. Interesting guy, she murmured to herself before adjusting her glasses, carefully moving the remaining rook, and trapping Hideki's king, achieving checkmate and victory for the demon. It felt like he was falling down an endless pit, enveloped in the deepest darkness. As he fell, time and space seemed to lose meaning. He didn't know how long he had been in that abyss, nor if he would ever find an end. The vertigo churned his stomach, and his mind couldn't process what was happening. But then, suddenly, he felt a strong impact on his back. Bam! With a grunt of pain, his body slammed against the pavement. The dull sound of the impact echoed in his ears, followed by the thunderous noise of rain hitting the ground around him. Slowly, he sat up, dazed and sore, trying to orient himself. He looked around a dark and deserted city, lit only by the dim glow of a few distant streetlights. The sky was covered with black clouds, and the rain fell relentlessly, soaking his body instantly. He was still wearing his hero's suit, made of reinforced black material, designed to be light and agile. His belt carried a few gadgets, like retractable hooks and smoke bombs, but not many supplies, as his original mission hadn't required such equipment. The cold metal of his provisional hero license was still in one of the compartments, reminding him of who he was and how far he had come. Every muscle in his body ached. He felt a constant pressure in his head, as though someone were squeezing his skull tightly. The sharp pain spread to his limbs, making it difficult to even stay on his feet. The rain, far from easing his discomfort, only intensified it. The cold water soaked his suit and hair, and each drop felt like a tiny needle piercing his skin. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to calm the pain and clear his mind. This was all confusing. Where was he? How had he gotten here? He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of uncertainty. He had no answers, but he knew he couldn't stay here for long. He needed to find shelter, or at least figure out what kind of world he had landed in. With one last look around, Hideki began to walk, his footsteps echoing through the empty streets as the rain continued to fall incessantly, covering the world around him with a heavy curtain of water. Morning came with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the scattered clouds, gently touching Hideki's face. His body, still sore from the impact of the previous night and the cold pavement he had slept on, creaked as he stood up and stretched. He had spent the night under a bridge, seeking refuge from the rain, though it hadn't spared him the cold or discomfort. With a sigh, Hideki shook off the droplets of moisture still clinging to his hero's suit, and the first thing he decided was to go back to the place where he had fallen the night before. Maybe there, he could find a clue, something that would give him an idea of what was happening or where he was. As he walked, he noticed something strange about the city. It wasn't just that he didn't recognize the place, but everything seemed different. The streets lacked the bustle and atmosphere he was used to feeling in Indomitable. It was as if the city wasn't at the same technological level, simpler, older in a sense. The buildings weren't as tall or modern, and the infrastructure, though functional, didn't seem as sophisticated as what he was accustomed to. Even the vehicles on the streets seemed outdated. What caught his attention the most was the way people looked at him. Not with admiration or recognition, but with curiosity and even distrust. The gazes rested on his hero's suit, and several passers-by whispered among themselves as he walked. It wasn't new for him to attract attention, but in this case, it made him uncomfortable, like he didn't belong there. Even stranger, the calmness of the streets felt unsettling. At this time of day, Indomitable would be bustling with activity, heroes patrolling, villains causing trouble, and citizens rushing in their routines. Yet here he didn't see any heroes in sight, nor hear sirens or warnings of villain attacks. Everything was absurdly quiet, almost too quiet for his taste. Eventually, he reached the spot where he had fallen the previous night. He examined the street carefully, hoping to find something out of the ordinary, some sign of his arrival or a clue as to how he ended up there. But what he found was nothing. The street was like any other, the pavement was intact, with no signs of his fall, and the surroundings showed no visible alteration. He crouched down to take a closer look, running his hand over the ground as if it might reveal some hidden clue. But there was nothing. Frustrated, he stood up and crossed his arms, looking around once more, trying to make sense of the situation. What the hell is going on here? He muttered to himself, gritting his teeth. Hideki sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. Not only had he found no clue, but everything around him seemed completely ordinary. But something inside him told him he wasn't in his world, and whatever had brought him here wasn't going to be easy to understand. After looking around once more, he decided that staying in one place wouldn't give him any answers. Despite his aching body from the fall and the rough night, he knew he had to move. Continuing to explore the area might help him find something or someone who could explain where he was. However, there was something else on his mind. He was still wearing his hero's suit, something that was clearly attracting attention and might not be the wisest choice in an unfamiliar place. I need to find some normal clothes, he thought as he observed the people around him. The clothes they wore seemed simpler, without the technology or flashy designs one would see in his world. Hideki set off, his senses alert, noticing the details around him. Not far ahead, he saw what appeared to be a local market. The shops were lined up along a narrow street, and the vendors had already started opening their stalls. He made his way toward it, hoping to find something useful. As he walked through the market, the bustle of the city began to pick up. The vendors called out their products, and conversations intertwined with the sound of footsteps and the movement of goods. Despite the growing activity, Hideki noticed something strange. He didn't see anyone who appeared to have powers or special abilities. In Indomitable or anywhere else in his world, there was always someone with a flashy quirk or using their power to do everyday tasks. But here nothing. Eventually, he arrived at a stall selling modest and somewhat outdated clothing by his standards, but functional. Without hesitation, he decided to buy a couple of items. As he sifted through the options, he overheard a nearby conversation. "Did you see that weird guy last night? He seemed to appear out of nowhere like he fell from the sky," murmured an older woman to a vendor. Hideki froze for a moment, his hands still on the clothes he was inspecting. He slowly turned, paying closer attention. "Yeah, I saw him. It was dark, but I swear he was wearing some kind of weird suit. Looks like he's doing cosplay or something," said the vendor, clearly intrigued but also suspicious. Hideki frowned, realizing that people were interpreting his hero's suit as part of a cosplay. Apparently, in this world, it wasn't common to see real hero suits, only costumes for events or entertainment. This explained why he was getting so many curious looks. He decided not to intervene in the conversation. It wasn't the time to ask questions. He moved away from the stall with the new clothes, looking for a place where he could change, and as he did, his mind kept processing what he had overheard. This world, though calm on the surface, might be hiding more than it seemed. Once he changed into his new clothes, something simpler and less attention-grabbing, he decided to continue on his way. He didn't know exactly what he should do, but one thing was clear: he couldn't stay still. He needed to find answers, and he needed to do it quickly. Hideki woke up to the sound of his phone alarm, a constant reminder of his daily routines. He slowly sat up in bed, his thoughts still wrapped in the recurring dream he had been having, one that reminded him of his arrival in this world. Even though several months had passed since he arrived here, the memory of that moment was still fresh in his mind. During this time, he had made significant progress in his training. He was now able to use his ki at a basic level, which gave him a sense of accomplishment and control. Along with ki training, He had maintained his physical exercise routine, pushing himself to the limit as he used to in his previous world. Although he tried not to rely on ki during these workouts, sometimes he couldn't help but use it to further enhance his abilities. Feeling the improvement in his capabilities filled him with joy and motivation. When using ki, he challenged himself even more, enjoying the challenge it presented. One of the times he focused the most on using his ki was during kata practice in various martial arts. These practices not only helped him perfect his technique but also allowed him to control the flow of his ki, integrating the power with his movements in a smooth and natural way. During this month, Hideki had also grown closer to Kaneko. The calm and satisfaction he had experienced with his new routine had led him to be more open and approachable. They spent more time together at the academy, and Hideki appreciated the company of the little girl, finding in her a sincere and selfless friendship. He had also spent time with Kaom, whom he told about his training and the person guiding him. Kaom's joy for his progress showed her support and understanding, and together they enjoyed moments both inside and outside the academy. These times together helped Hideki adapt better to his new environment and feel more at home. With the morning already underway, Hideki prepared for his daily routine. He showered quickly and dressed in his training clothes. As he dressed, his thoughts wandered to his achievements and the future. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but the determination and discipline he had learned kept pushing him forward. Issei Hayata had had a week he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. The usual routine of the perverted young man, which consisted of spying on the girls at the academy and avoiding two of the top students, Kiba Yudo and Hideki Saito, had been dramatically shaken. Kiba and Hideki, with their charisma and skills, captured the attention of almost all the girls. Issei was more annoyed by Hideki because they shared a classroom. The week took an unexpected turn when a girl from another academy, Yuma Amano, confessed her feelings to him. Issei, inexperienced in relationships and desperate to have a girlfriend, accepted without thinking much. However, Yuma turned out to be a fallen angel, sent to kill him due to the threat his sacred gear could pose in the future. This revelation ended with Issei's death. But the story didn't end there. Issei was reincarnated as a demon in the service of Rias Gremory, the young woman with scarlet hair who had always been his platonic love. The unexpected didn't stop with his reincarnation. A few days later, Issei was attacked again by a fallen angel. Though he was injured, his biggest surprise was waking up the next day with Rias naked in his bed. Stunned and confused, Issei listened to Rias explain the recent events and his new life in the world of demons. Despite his recent death and transformation, Issei found a new opportunity to be close to Rias, who, after his last attack, explained everything about the supernatural world and his new role as a demon. As Rias shared information about his role in his new life and the supernatural world, Issei had to assimilate the truth behind his reincarnation and his connection to the beings he had met. The reality of his situation began to settle in, and as he struggled to understand his new role, Issei faced the challenge of balancing his life as a young demon in a world filled with dangers and unexpected opportunities. Which brings us to the present. Issei Hayata was taking his usual morning walk to the academy, immersed in his thoughts about the recent turn of his life. He had gone from being a pervert with dreams of having a girlfriend to a demon in training, and his mind was full of the confusion and amazement that this change had brought him. By the end of the day, Issei, thinking he was alone in the club, was organizing some pamphlets as part of his new tasks as a reincarnated demon, meant to form contracts with humans to increase the Gremory family's reputation. Just then, Rias entered the room to announce they had received a mission to eliminate a rogue demon. The news surprised Issei, and although he was still adjusting to his new life as a demon, he knew that missions and danger were now part of his reality. Once everyone gathered, Kiba explained to Issei that a rogue demon was an old servant who had betrayed their master, sometimes even killing them. These demons, now free from any control, posed a dangerous threat. As Kiba provided more details, the group was transported by a magic circle to their destination. "We're going to an abandoned house. They say a rogue demon lures people there and eats them," Akino commented calmly as she looked at the sinister house they were about to enter. Issei felt a chill as he looked at the place, knowing that his new life as a demon was going to expose him to unimaginable dangers. But he also knew that now he had a responsibility within the Gremory family, and he couldn't fail. 2 more nights passed, and Hideki, true to his resolve, continued his investigation of the abandoned theater. However, his efforts bore no immediate fruit. The demon had not manifested on those 2 nights, and the traces found offered no conclusive evidence. Despite the lack of progress, Hideki was not willing to give up so easily. On the 3rd night, with the same determination as always, he returned to the theater. Something in the atmosphere was different from the moment he arrived. The air seemed thicker, and that oppressive feeling of demonic energy he had felt before was now much more intense, as if something was calling to him directly. This night will be different. The air was dense, almost suffocating, and every step he took toward the theater made his skin crawl. Cautiously he approached, trying to make sure his target was truly inside. Dressed in his hero's suit, Hideki moved through the shadows with the agility and stealth he had perfected over years of training, determined to face whatever awaited him inside. Hideki reached the 2nd floor with feline agility, entering through a window with perfected stealth. He moved cautiously, searching for the being responsible for the horrible events in the abandoned theater. After thoroughly exploring the 2nd floor without finding anything, he decided to descend to the 1st. As soon as his feet touched the ground after the last step, a seductive and ominous voice emerged from the shadows. "I smell something delicious. Is it sweet? Is it bitter?" The distorted voice of a woman resonated in the air. Hideki tensed upon noticing a figure that, although it appeared to be a beautiful woman naked from the waist up, emanated an unsettling presence. His instincts told him danger was near, and he quickly took a battle stance, holding a kunai in each hand and focusing his ki. Unfortunately, Hideki did not have his usual staff, lost before arriving in this world, but he still had some kunai and shuriken in his suit. "A human," the woman said, emerging fully from the shadows. While her upper half was that of a beautiful woman, from the waist down, her body resembled that of a manticore. "You've been investigating too much, human. You're not ready for what you're about to face here." The woman monster seemed to recognize Hideki, clearly noticing his investigation into her actions. Hideki, prepared for a dangerous confrontation, felt the pressure of facing an unknown threat. "I'll stop you," Hideki said firmly, "and protect those who have been affected by your actions. I won't let you keep causing harm." The figure laughed maliciously, a laugh that ominously echoed in the room. "Very well then. Let's see if you can handle what you've found." The air grew even denser, and Hideki braced himself for the impending confrontation. The woman monster began to touch herself lasciviously, and small magical circles appeared on her nipples. Bang! 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 Suddenly, several shots rang out, with flashes of light speeding toward Hideki at an incredible velocity. With agile movements, he dodged the attack, surprised to see the flashes melting the walls where they hit. Hideki evaded the light flashes with agility, his movements precise and quick as the wind. The woman monster, seeing her first attack fail, furrowed her brow in fury. Instead of being paralyzed by failure, the monster prepared for a new attack, her body spinning with unexpected agility. Hideki advanced with determination, but before he could throw his first kunai, the woman monster conjured a magical barrier that deflected his attack. The barrier became visible as a layer of black energy, blocking the kunai with flashes of light. The creature laughed with a distorted voice as the dark aura around her body intensified. "Did you think that would be enough, human?" the creature murmured, her eyes glowing with malevolence. Hideki, adjusting his strategy, decided to use the environment to his advantage. He quickly moved toward a corner of the room, trying to avoid the next spell the woman monster was preparing. As he moved, he threw a kunai at one of the nearby shelves, causing several objects to fall and block the creature's line of sight. The woman monster became irritated when she saw her vision obstructed, and suddenly, she cast a darkness spell that enveloped the room in black fog. Hideki, trapped in the mist, had to rely on his senses beyond sight. The fog made his environment unclear and hindered his ability to calculate the distance and angle of his attacks. While trying to orient himself, Hideki heard the creature's whisper drawing nearer. With a quick movement, he used his ki to clear a small area of the fog, partially revealing the figure of the monster. However, the woman monster had already launched another attack, dark energy balls flying at high speed. Hideki barely had time to dodge them, one of them grazing his arm and causing a sharp pain. Desperate to find an opening, Hideki moved quickly, using his training to predict the creature's movements. With a rapid series of movements, he threw kunai at the joints of the woman monster, but his attacks were intercepted by energy shields that the creature generated in the blink of an eye. The woman monster, now partially visible, let out a scream of fury and launched a dark tentacle attack from her lower torso, extending with surprising speed. Hideki had to move with agility to dodge the tentacles that sought to trap him. Despite his efforts, one of the tentacles managed to grab his leg, making him fall to the ground. With his leg trapped and feeling the pain, Hideki was forced to use an advanced evasion technique. He focused his ki into his arms and made a series of quick movements to cut the tentacle holding him in place. Finally, with a final effort, he freed himself and stood up, still staggering from the impact of the attack. The battle intensified as the woman monster increased the speed of her attacks. Hideki, aware of the growing threat, had to employ a more elaborate strategy. He moved in circles around the monster, trying to confuse her. At a key moment, he made a powerful leap toward a wall, spun in the air, and his feet touched the wall to propel himself at high speed beneath the massive creature. Sliding skillfully beneath her, he wrapped his kunai with a significant charge of ki, hoping his attack would be effective. The kunai tore through the manticore's belly, but the attack wasn't deep enough to significantly weaken the creature due to the short length of the weapon. Looking at the attack, Hideki noticed that the human half of the monster avoided getting close to him, quickly deducing that it was her weak point. He checked his pouch and saw that he only had the kunai in his hand left, the others were buried in the monster's skin. Just then, a sudden attack from the monster's tail hit him, throwing him brutally against a wall. Hideki twisted his body in the air, narrowly dodging a second attack that destroyed the wall where he had been. He got up, staggering, aware that he needed a plan to overcome the demon. Determined not to give up, Hideki concentrated his ki to the maximum, knowing that only a risky attack could bring him victory. The monster launched a direct attack with one of her claws, and Hideki made a powerful jump, reaching about 3 meters in height to dodge the blow. He landed on the monster's arm and ran toward her human half, using all the energy he had left to maintain the necessary speed. With one last kunai in hand, Hideki threw it at the woman monster's face. Although she blocked the kunai with her human arm, that moment of distraction was what Hideki had been waiting for. He concentrated all his ki in his arms and approached the monster's human half. He made a methodical and precise attack, a left jab to the jaw to disorient her, followed by a right cross that intensified the impact, and a left hook to the ribs, feeling them crack under his fist. Then, he prepared his best attack, a move he had only seen his master use once, Vital Strike. All the muscles in his body briefly tensed before relaxing. He concentrated all that was left of his ki into his right arm and launched his right fist with devastating power directly into the woman monster's stomach. The blow sank deeply, causing the woman to vomit a large amount of blood, splattering Hideki in the process. The attack he had used was the Gutaijutsu, a technique that required the fighter to tense their body to the maximum at the moment of impact. When executed correctly, the punch hits with the full weight of the body, making it one of the most destructive attacks in his arsenal, and combined with the ki, the attack was even more powerful. Hideki had practiced this technique tirelessly, and tonight, he put it into action with an effort and precision that reflected all his training. The devastating blow left the woman monster staggering, her whole body trembling with the impact. The force of the Gutaijutsu had penetrated deeply, causing blood to pour from her mouth and her trying to regain balance. Although the attack was devastating, the creature had not been completely knocked down. Her fury grew, and her movements became even more erratic and violent. As Hideki stepped back to prepare for a possible counterattack, the woman monster charged at him with renewed fury. Her tail, moving with surprising agility, shook dangerously. Hideki narrowly dodged, but the impact of the close attack sent debris and dust flying around the room, impairing his vision and making him vulnerable to unexpected attacks. The monster, wounded but still extremely dangerous, launched a series of quick and uncontrolled attacks, combining claws and the tail in a frenzy of movements. Hideki, forced to stay focused, moved quickly and with agility, dodging as best as he could to keep a safe distance. In a moment of desperation, the woman monster charged forward with impressive force. Hideki, anticipating the attack, made a quick turn to dodge, but his movement was intercepted by a swift sweep of the tail that threw him against a wall, leaving him stunned and on the ground. Breathing heavily, Hideki struggled to recover. His muscles were tense and sore, the impact of recent attacks had left him exhausted, and he had drained the last of his ki. However, he knew he couldn't give up. His willpower was the only thing keeping him on his feet. Despite the overwhelming fatigue, he raised both fists, determined not to leave without giving everything he had. With his body trembling and his mind growing more confused, Hideki felt his consciousness fading. His eyes blurred and turned white, his body stopped responding. He stood there, motionless, with a lost gaze, completely unconscious but still standing. Boom! Crash! A white flash collided with the monster, violently throwing it against a wall. Moments earlier, Rias Gremory and her entourage had arrived at the abandoned house after receiving a report about a renegade demon causing havoc. The group approached the place cautiously, prepared to face any dangerous situation. However, as they got closer, a powerful crash startled them. Peering through several broken walls, they could see what was happening inside. A strange figure, dressed in an unusual outfit, a kind of light, modern armor, was fighting intensely against the renegade demon. The group soon realized that the figure was a human, and the most surprising thing of all was that he was using ki, although Kaneko was the only one who noticed that his use of it was basic. The fight seemed to be nearing its climax. The observers watched as the man executed a tremendous combo of ki-charged strikes to the monster's human half, seemingly landing a decisive blow. However, their surprise grew when they saw that, despite continuing to vomit blood, the monster attacked in a final desperate act, and it was evident that it was about to pass out from blood loss. Despite his efforts, the man couldn't avoid the attack and was brutally thrown against the wall through which the Gremory clan group had been observing. Kaneko realized two things. First, that the key signature of the man was surprisingly similar to that of a friend of hers, and second, that the man's scent confirmed her suspicions. Hideki-senpai, she screamed in her mind. It was her friend and senpai, Hideki Saito, who was in life-threatening danger. Without hesitation, Kaneko stepped forward, moving with surprising speed, even for Kiba. She passed through the hole in the wall through which they had been watching, and with renewed strength, she delivered a devastating blow to the monster. Her attack made the renegade demon stagger, further weakening the creature. As Kaneko approached Hideki, she was surprised to see that, despite his critical condition, he was still standing, his guard up, trying to remain alert. A strange sense of danger coming from Hideki made her stop momentarily, not without concern. Her face paled as she realized that Hideki was still not out of danger. She knew the battle was over, but at least, for now, they had managed to save Hideki and neutralize the threat looming over the city. Rias and the rest of the group hurried to enter, ready to finish off the monster and ensure the safety of the subject. But Kaneko's blow had been so powerful that the monster fell to the ground, already dead. With the threat contained, Rias and her entourage quickly approached the man, who lay unconscious and severely injured. Issei was the first to speak, his astonishment clear after what he had just witnessed. The scene had been so shocking that he hadn't yet noticed that the unconscious man before them was an ordinary human. That was amazing, he commented, still in awe. Is he part of Rias Butch's clan? He asked, genuinely curious as he approached the unconscious man. Is he unconscious? His surprise grew as he saw that the man was standing but clearly not conscious, and he was about to approach further when an arm stopped him before he entered the man's range. Don't come closer, warned Kaneko in a firm voice, her gaze still fixed on Hideki. Issei, confused, looked at the man's face. It felt familiar, but the mask covering part of his face made it impossible for him to fully identify him. Why? Asked Issei, incredulous. He wanted to help, but Kaneko's gesture baffled him. He's injured. We need to help him as soon as possible, said Issei, his desperation palpable as he saw that no one was moving to assist the man. Kaneko nodded, acknowledging the truth in Issei's words, but remained firm. Danger, was all Kaneko said. Next, if you come closer, you'll be attacked. Kaneko's words left Issei even more confused. The fear in her voice and the severity of her warning made him hesitate, but his concern for Hideki's condition didn't fade. Issei looked around, searching for any signs of what might be happening. The fact that the man was in such bad shape yet still standing indicated that the situation was far more complicated than it seemed at first glance. Rias, observing the tension in the scene, stepped forward and, with a determined look, took the initiative. "Kaneko is right," said Rias in a calm but authoritative voice. "This man is incredibly strong, but he's also extremely dangerous. His spirit hasn't given up. We need to be cautious and make sure there are no more surprises." With a quick glance at Kaneko, Rias signaled her to act. Kaneko, responding to the gesture, gently moved Issei aside and slowly approached Hideki. Her senses were alert, ready for any signs of danger. As she approached, a strong bloodlust emanated from Hideki for a moment, freezing Issei in his place. Boom! Suddenly, Hideki, with an explosive movement, launched a direct attack at Kaneko. However, Kaneko's speed allowed her to block the strike precisely, leaving Issei even more impressed by the scene. With the attack stopped, Hideki's body lost the strength he had left, and he collapsed completely inert. Kaneko, now more relaxed but still worried, leaned down to check his condition. The ferocity of the initial attack had faded, replaced by the vulnerability of a man on the brink of exhaustion. Hideki zenpamered Kaneko, her voice full of concern as she examined his visible injuries. Her movements, usually brusque, became gentle and careful, her hardness replaced by a tenderness born from her worry for him. Issei, watching closely, couldn't help but ask, "Is he okay?" His voice reflected the mix of fear and curiosity consuming him. Kaneko nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed the anxiety she felt. She knew that although Hideki had shown great strength, his condition was serious, and he needed urgent help. "We need to take him to a safe place to treat him," said Kaneko with determination. "If we don't do it soon, his condition could worsen." Rias, assessing the situation, nodded in agreement. "Let's take him to the club. There we can tend to his wounds and find out what happened." As the group hurried to move Hideki, Rias observed attentively. Something in the way Kaneko referred to him made her remember a name she had heard before. "Hideki Saito," murmured Rias to herself, her eyes widening in surprise as she remembered. Akino used to mention this young man in her jokes with Kaneko, but now, seeing him in person, gave her a new perspective. "Is it Hideki Saito?" asked Rias, approaching Kaneko with astonishment in her voice. Kaneko nodded seriously. "Yes, Rias Butchu. He is Hideki-senpai. I don't know how he ended up facing that renegade demon, but we need to help him now." Rias saw the deep affection Kaneko had for Hideki reflected in her desperation to save him. Without wasting any more time, she made a decision. "All right. Let's take him to the club and do everything we can to help him recover." Prepared to provide all the help needed, with renewed urgency, the group hurried to move Hideki, aware that every second was crucial. "And I hope you liked it. It might not be noticeable, but in this version, the demon is stronger than its original counterpart. And well, Hideki still can't match Kiba and Kaneko's strength and speed, but that will change as the story progresses. When I imagined Hideki's suit, I always saw it like Nightwing's from Batman Arkham Knight. I apologize if the images aren't the best, but they were the ones where I thought the suit looked best. Just imagine he has the regular mask, not the one that seems connected to the suit. Extra, I don't exist." Hideki had been staring at the same empty cup of instant ramen for what seemed like hours, lost in thought. His head was spinning, and a sharp migraine threatened to split his skull as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of his situation. Frustrated, he kicked the cup, sending it rolling to the other end of the alley that had become his home for the past night. With only 20,000 yen in his pocket, which had shrunk to 16,600 after the nutritious ramen meal and a bottle of water, plus some clothes so he wouldn't have to keep wearing his hero's suit, he desperately needed a source of income. Sleeping on the street, while uncomfortable, was manageable for now. His hero's suit, though not the most comfortable, at least kept him warm. Still angry, frustrated, and with his stomach growling, Hideki decided to move. His eyes needed a break from the misery surrounding him. Maybe exploring the city would help clear his thoughts. A library seemed like a good place to start, and the best part, it was free. Leaving behind the dirty and probably red light district of the city, Hideki headed toward the center. He had seen a map at a bus stop and adjusted his route accordingly. At least the city wasn't too big. A small blessing amidst the chaos. After walking for about 30 minutes, without even stopping to catch his breath, he arrived at his destination. The library was modern, clean, and welcoming, as if it had recently been renovated. As he looked at his reflection in the glass door, he at least looked less like a bum and more like a scruffy college student. Upon entering, he felt a warm gust of air that brought him back to life. Maybe he should reconsider his bed on the street. As he crossed the lobby, the man at the reception desk gave him a brief glance before returning to his work, not saying anything, but none of that mattered. Minutes later, Hideki exited the library faster than he entered, struggling to contain his labored breathing. His research had led to a horrifying conclusion: he didn't exist. There was no trace of a 17-year-old named Hideki Saito in this world. No Saito Inoki, his 68-year-old grandfather, a man who had worked as a recognized carpenter all his life. He didn't exist. Tears began to well in his eyes as he accepted that harsh reality. Every search he had done in the databases confirmed the same: there was no UA High School, the most prestigious hero academy in Japan and Muzurifu. Nothing. His life, his identity, his world, everything had disappeared. He had no birth certificate, no ID, no proof of schooling. Finding a legal job was impossible. And even if he miraculously managed to find one, he doubted they would pay enough to afford an apartment in the city. Plus, what landlord would trust a 17-year-old who couldn't even prove his name, let alone his ability to pay rent? Surely there were laws preventing minors from working without permission. The cool afternoon air hit his face as he left the library, but Hideki barely noticed. Every step he took echoed like a hollow sound in his mind. The streets, the people walking by, everything seemed blurry, distant, as if the whole world had become unreal, indifferent to him. It felt like he was trapped in a dream he couldn't wake up from, one where he had no control. He walked aimlessly, not caring where his feet took him. Every thought returned to the same dark truth: he didn't exist. He was a ghost in a world that didn't recognize his existence. No one here knew who he was, what he had sacrificed, or what he had faced. Suddenly, the exhaustion hit him like a wave. His body, though strong from years of training, finally gave in to the pressure. He found a bench in an empty park and slumped onto it, resting his head in his hands. The headache returned, but this time it was more emotional than physical. A sense of hopelessness settled in his chest, heavy like a stone he couldn't lift. What do I do now? He thought, his mind in a whirl. There were no heroes to turn to, no friends, no UA, nothing. He was alone. As alone as when his parents abandoned him. The same wound, the same emptiness, but deep within that despair, something inside him resisted giving up. That little spark, that indomitable fire that had kept Hideki alive even when everything seemed lost. He had survived before without a quirk, had fought for his place in a world that considered him weak. If there was one thing he had learned, it was that he couldn't rely on anyone to save him. He couldn't expect a rescue. He took a deep breath, lifted his head, and looked up at the sky, which was beginning to turn orange with the sunset. I'm not someone who gives up so easily, he whispered to himself, reminding himself what made him different. He didn't have a quirk, but he had something many other heroes didn't: an unbreakable will. At that moment, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby trees. Something inside him calmed, even if just a little. There were no easy solutions, but he was determined to find a way out. He needed information, not just about his non-existence, but about this new world. He had to understand it. And for that, he would have to be clever. He stood up, adjusted his coat, and decided that his next destination would be a place where he could get answers. He had considered the library, but maybe he should aim for something else, something that would give him a broader view of the city and the supernatural world he was now trapped in. One step at a time, Hideki. One step at a time. With that renewed determination, Hideki prepared to face whatever this new world threw at him. He didn't have superpowers or a quirk backing him up, but he had something no one could take away: his indomitable spirit. Rias and the other members of the clan were returning to the Occult Research Club after rescuing Hideki, who was badly injured following his confrontation with the renegade demon. Kaneko, with a delicacy that few would have believed possible in someone of her size, was carrying Hideki in her arms, making sure not to hurt him. Despite her physical strength, it was clear how much care she was putting into every step, with an expression that showed more concern than she usually let on. The group walked in silence, as Ria's magic transport circle couldn't be used by anyone outside of her clan, which forced them to bring Hideki back on foot. They were all still processing what they had just witnessed. Hideki, a mere human without any supernatural powers, had managed to put a powerful renegade demon on the ropes. While he hadn't fully defeated the demon, his resistance, skill, and determination had left everyone stunned. Issei, who had recently become a demon, seemed the most dazed. It was the first time he had seen a fight of that level, and it seemed almost unbelievable that Hideki, without a sacred gear or any supernatural advantage, had lasted so long against such a powerful creature. "I can't believe it," Issei murmured, looking at Hideki as they walked. His admiration was palpable. How could someone like him, being human, fight like that? Rias, walking ahead, nodded slightly. "It's impressive," she admitted, though her tone reflected concern. "It's not common to see a human face off against a demon of that level and survive." Kaneko, meanwhile, could only focus on Hideki, who was resting in her arms. The little girl had witnessed her senpai's fight, and no matter how much she tried to hide it, the image of him throwing himself into battle with such fierceness had unsettled her. She knew Hideki as a kind person, always willing to help others, but seeing that side of him, the warrior who didn't hesitate to put himself in danger, had surprised her. He didn't seem like the type of person who could hurt anyone. At first glance, he seemed like the kind of person who aimed to live a peaceful and normal life. Once they arrived at the Occult Research Club, Kaneko gently laid her senpai on one of the sofas. Despite her strength, her movements were careful, almost as if she feared causing him harm. Rias, taking charge of the situation, gave clear instructions to Akino and Kaneko. "We need to treat his wounds. Carefully remove his suit." Thanks to the proper lighting in the club, everyone could see Hideki's suit more clearly. It was an outfit they had never seen before, a kind of modern armor designed for stealth and agility. It looked like something straight out of a superhero movie. The dark, durable material fit perfectly to Hideki's body, like a second skin. The members of the club exchanged surprised glances. No one had seen anything like it, and they were all sure that human technology wasn't advanced enough to create such a suit. Kaneko and Akino looked at each other, unsure where to start. The suit seemed complicated, with no obvious fasteners. They decided to begin with the extremities, thinking it would be the easiest. Kaneko knelt beside his feet, carefully removing his boots with the same attention she had used when carrying him, while Akino focused on the gloves. When Akino finally managed to remove one of the gloves, she paused for a moment, staring at Hideki's hands. They were large and robust, rough from the calluses formed over years of hard work. Small scars ran across his fingers and the backs of his hands, signs of countless battles, training, and trials he had faced. Akino, though used to seeing strength in others, couldn't help but feel surprised at the marks left on Hideki's body. "These hands," Akino murmured to herself, impressed by the toughness they showed. It was a clear contrast to the kindness Hideki always displayed, as if his body spoke of a life of struggle that he kept hidden. Kaneko, who was also closely observing while removing his boots, noticed these details with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Those calluses and scars weren't just signs of his determination, but of the countless times he had pushed his limits. The small demon couldn't help but feel more connected to him, knowing that behind his kindness, there was a warrior who had suffered and trained tirelessly, all with one goal in mind: to protect others, even if it meant putting his own life at risk. Both girls, now aware of what being Hideki truly meant, exchanged a silent glance. As they continued to care for him, their respect for the unconscious boy before them only grew. With the boots and gloves removed, Kaneko and Akino briefly looked at each other before proceeding with the upper part of the suit. They were both nervous, not just because of the severity of Hideki's injuries, but because of what they would discover underneath that strange armor. They worked together carefully, making sure not to worsen any of his wounds as they slid the suit upward, slowly revealing the skin of Hideki's torso. When they finally managed to remove the top part of the suit, They both stopped for a moment, surprised at what they saw. Hideki's body was covered in recent wounds, bruises, cuts, and marks from the fight that had just ended. But what caught their attention the most were the scars, some older than others. They seemed to come in all forms: deep cuts, scratches, even marks that looked like gunshot wounds. It was clear that their senpai had been through numerous battles before this one, and each scar told a story that they still didn't know. "He's been fighting much longer than we thought," Akino murmured, barely audible, as her eyes traced Hideki's torso. But what also caught their attention was how well-toned his body was. His pectorals were firm, large, and defined, but not exaggerated. At first glance, they seemed soft, almost like pillows, despite the evident musculature beneath. Just below his pectorals, a well-defined six-pack perfectly fit his frame. Akino, though trying to maintain composure, couldn't help but admire how harmonious his physique was, showing not just strength but also a perfect balance for combat. Kaneko, though more reserved, noticed the same. Despite the seriousness of the situation, she couldn't deny how impressive her senpai's body was. Hideki's muscles weren't unnaturally large, like someone who trained only for appearance. Instead, his body was that of a warrior, someone who had sculpted every muscle for combat, for endurance, and not just to look good. Every part of his physique showed functionality, as if each inch of his body had been shaped by effort and the need to survive. Kaneko noticed her hands trembling slightly as she continued removing the suit. The mix of concern for his wounds and respect for what he had done to stay standing unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Still, she continued the task, carefully removing the last part of the suit as she tried to ignore the warmth she felt in her cheeks. "He's stronger than he looks," Akino said with a faint smile as her eyes lingered on the scars. "But this must have cost him a lot." Kaneko nodded silently. She couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and concern at the same time. Hideki wasn't just kind and humble, he also carried the weight of a warrior who had fought in more battles than he had ever admitted. With the suit finally removed, both Kaneko and Akino couldn't help but take a closer look at Hideki's body. As their hands worked carefully to avoid worsening his injuries, the two girls found themselves staring at him with a mix of awe and, in Akino's case, a hint of more mischievous curiosity. Akino, with her usual playful demeanor, let out a soft chuckle under her breath as her eyes wandered over Hideki's well-sculpted torso. Her gaze lingered on his notably large and defined pectorals before drifting down to his chiseled six-pack, which seemed perfectly suited for battle. The hint of perplexity in her expression was soon replaced by a spark of mischief. "While who would have thought such an impressive body was hidden under that armor?" Akino murmured, her tone low and seductive as her eyes continued to roam over Hideki's torso. "I wonder how many other girls would want to see this sight." Hearing this, Kaneko felt a sudden warmth rise to her cheeks. Though she tried to stay calm and focus on tending to Hideki's wounds, Akino's comment only clouded her thoughts. She tried not to look too much, but every time her eyes strayed to her senpai's muscles, she felt a strange mix of admiration and nervousness. This isn't something to joke about," Kaneko whispered, her voice barely audible, as she avoided eye contact with Akino and focused on one of the scars on Hideki's arm. But her hands trembled slightly as she worked, aware of the warmth she felt being so close to her senpai. Akino, for her part, couldn't help but notice Kaneko's shyness. With a playful smile, she leaned a little closer to the petite girl, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Oh, what's wrong, Kaneko-kun? Did you blush because of Hideki's body?" Akino whispered, her tone soft but provocative. Kaneko quickly shook her head, though her face betrayed her discomfort. "No, it's just that," she murmured, unsure of what to say. The truth was, even though she had never thought of her senpai in that way before, seeing him like this, with his torso exposed, made her feel more aware of him. Despite her usual calm demeanor, there was something about the situation that made her feel strange, almost vulnerable. Akino, enjoying Kaneko's reaction, couldn't resist making another comment as her fingers brushed over one of the scars on Hideki's abdomen, lightly grazing his hardened skin. "I guess someone as kind as Hideki hides a lot of surprises beneath the surface," she said playfully. "Who would have thought his body would be so well built? No wonder he's so strong." Kaneko tried to maintain her composure, but Akino's words weren't helping. She glanced at her senpai out of the corner of her eye, wrestling with her own thoughts. She didn't want to seem perverted, but she couldn't deny that, in that moment, Hideki looked incredibly strong and attractive. As Akino continued her playful teasing, Kaneko could only look away, the blush on her cheeks becoming more evident. "Just focus on healing him," Kaneko replied tensely, trying to stay calm. But even she knew the situation had become far more uncomfortable than she had expected. Akino, with an unmistakable smile, began preparing her healing magic. As she invoked the spell, her fingers, now glowing with magical energy, moved over Hideki's body in a way that felt unnecessarily slow. Her hand began gently applying the magic to the more visible wounds, but at the same time, she took the opportunity to explore Hideki's well-defined muscles. "How interesting these muscles are, like steel," she murmured softly, as if talking to herself but loud enough for Kaneko to hear. Her hand brushed over Hideki's chiseled abdomen, where old scars and fresh wounds intertwined, creating a mix that only accentuated the toughness of his body. But there was something more. Though hard on the outside, they're also surprisingly soft to the touch. Akino let her hand glide over Hideki's pectorals with a kind of almost lascivious curiosity, admiring how firm yet flexible his body was. Every movement was an excuse to touch him a little more than necessary. "It really is a work of art," she whispered with a soft laugh as she continued applying her magic to his wounds. Her fingers traced the lines of his muscles as if each scar, each scratch, told a story she wanted to explore in detail. "It's amazing that a human without a sacred gear could develop a body like this. It's almost inhuman." Kaneko, who was watching closely, couldn't help but frown at Akino's obvious lack of professionalism. The way her hands lingered too long on every part of Hideki's body, and the way her eyes gleamed with a mix of admiration and mischief didn't go unnoticed by the petite girl. Though Kaneko was more reserved in expressing her feelings, she couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort at Akino's behavior. "Akino, just heal him," Kaneko murmured, trying to sound firm, but the tone of her voice betrayed her growing unease. Akino, still smiling, glanced at her out of the corner of her eye. "Oh, Kaneko-kun, don't worry. I'm taking very good care of Hideki," Akino replied in a playful tone, though she was clearly enjoying the situation. "Besides, I can't help but admire how well built he is. We don't get to see someone like this every day, do we?" As she spoke, her fingers traced a small circle on Hideki's chest, as if drawing something on his skin with the healing magic. It was obvious she was in no hurry to finish the job. "Yes, it's quite fascinating how much strength must be behind these muscles," Akino added, sliding her hands over his shoulders and collarbone, enjoying the contact with every part of his body. Her smile grew more mischievous. "I wonder how many more surprises our dear Hideki is hiding beneath that kindness." Kaneko, growing increasingly frustrated, tried to focus on the wounds that still needed healing, but Akino's behavior was distracting her. She couldn't help but notice how Akino's hands continued to explore with more freedom than necessary, and though Kaneko tried to stay out of it, a faint blush settled on her cheeks. "That's enough, Akino," Kaneko finally said, more firmly this time, though still in a low voice. "Stop playing around and finish healing him." Akino, letting out a soft laugh, finished applying the magic, though not without one last lingering touch on Hideki's chest, savoring the moment a little longer. All right, Kaneko-kun. I was just enjoying the view a bit," she replied, amused, before stepping back and letting Kaneko approach again. "But you have to admit, our dear Hideki is quite the mystery both inside and out." As Kaneko leaned in to continue tending to Hideki, she couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and nervousness. Though Akino had been playful and bold, there was something in her words that resonated with Kaneko. Hideki's body, with all its scars and muscles, was a reflection of someone who had faced far more than he let on. Kaneko, now calmer after Akino's retreat, leaned over Hideki, her small frame barely taking up any space next to her senpai's imposing figure. Though she initially just wanted to make sure his wounds were fully covered by the magic, her fingers began to move almost automatically, tracing the scars with a delicacy that contrasted with her usual stern expression. Her small, light hand gently brushed the edge of a scar on Hideki's abdomen. Without realizing it, her fingers followed the contours of his muscles, noticing how they tensed slightly even while he was unconscious. Despite her reserved nature, something about the sight of Hideki, so vulnerable yet so strong, kept her completely absorbed. Kaneko wasn't the type to easily get carried away by her emotions, but feeling the warmth of Hideki's body, watching his chest rise and fall rhythmically with his breathing, made her feel something she didn't fully understand. Her pulse quickened, and her face slowly warmed, though she tried not to show it. "It's hard," she murmured to herself, barely aware of what she was doing. Her fingers continued to trace a soft line from his abdomen to his chest, noticing how his pectorals were firm and broad, as if built to withstand any burden or blow. Kaneko knew Hideki wasn't one to boast about his physical strength, but his body told a different story. However, in the midst of her trance, a soft laugh brought her back to reality. "Oh, Kaneko, seems like I'm not the only one enjoying the view." Akino's voice was playful, with a clear hint of mischief. She had been silently observing from a corner, noticing how Kaneko, usually so reserved, had fallen into a state of fascination with Hideki's body. Kaneko tensed immediately, pulling her hand away as if Hideki's body were on fire. Her face, which usually maintained a cold and unreadable expression, turned a soft shade of pink as she tried to look away from her senpai. "Too wasn't," she began to say, though her voice sounded shyer than usual, betraying her attempt to stay composed. Akino let out a softer laugh, clearly amused by Kaneko's reaction. She stepped closer, placing a hand on her own chin as she observed the petite girl with a knowing smile. "You don't have to lie, Kaneko. It's natural to feel curious," Akino said, giving her a small pat on the head. "After all, Hideki has quite an impressive body, don't you think?" Kaneko tried to maintain her composure, but the blush on her face didn't fade, and though she tried to ignore Akino's comments, she couldn't deny the truth in what she had said. Hideki was strong, both in spirit and in physique, and though she would never admit it out loud, she couldn't help but feel something when touching him. "I was just making sure he was okay," Kaneko finally replied, crossing her arms defensively, though the tone of her voice still betrayed her nervousness. Akino looked at her with a satisfied smile but didn't press further. She had enjoyed teasing her enough for now. Of course, Akino replied, her tone clearly teasing as she stepped back a little. "But if you need more time to make sure, don't worry. I won't say a thing." Akino and Kaneko continued their task of removing Hideki's suit, working carefully to avoid aggravating the young man's injuries as he rested. Now it was time to remove his belt, which at first glance seemed like an ordinary accessory, but upon touching it, both girls noticed it was quite different. It wasn't just a simple belt, it had several small compartments for gadgets and tools. "This belt is quite peculiar," Akino commented, sliding her hands along the accessory as her fingers explored each compartment. "It seems more functional than decorative. Did you notice, Kaneko?" Kaneko nodded with a soft HM as she also inspected the belt with curiosity. It wasn't something they had seen before, and it was clear it didn't belong to ordinary human technology. "It's not like what we're used to," Kaneko murmured, as Akino finally managed to unbuckle the belt with a soft click. After removing the belt with its gadget compartments, they moved on to unbutton Hideki's pants, though they couldn't help but notice what this implied. Akino, always playful and with a provocative smile, slid the fabric down with a mix of curiosity and mischief. Kaneko, on the other hand, remained more reserved, but even she couldn't help feeling nervous, her fingers fumbling as she helped. As they pulled down the pants and set them aside, both girls were left speechless. Though Hideki was still wearing his boxers, the outline of his crotch was hard to ignore. It was impossible not to notice the size, and the thought made both girls' pulses quicken. "Oh my," Akino murmured, a clearly lascivious gleam in her eyes as she scanned Hideki's figure from top to bottom. "He definitely has more than just well-built muscles, don't you think, Kaneko?" Kaneko tried not to look, but the temptation was hard to ignore. She knew she shouldn't be focusing on that, but her eyes unconsciously drifted toward the bulge. The blush on her cheeks became more evident, and though she tried to stay focused on her task, her hand trembled slightly as she touched Hideki's exposed skin. "No," Kaneko murmured, quickly looking away. "It's not that big of a deal," but her own voice betrayed her, and Akino couldn't help but notice her shyness. The older girl laughed softly, enjoying the little cat's reaction. "Kaneko, you don't need to be so shy," Akino said as she applied a gentle magical touch to Hideki's torso. It's completely natural. A body like this isn't something you see every day, right? Her hands moved with deliberate slowness as she touched Hideki's muscles, seemingly focused on healing him, but clearly enjoying every second. Akino's fingers traced his pectorals, firm as steel but surprisingly soft to the touch. Every muscle seemed sculpted, not overly large but perfectly proportioned for a body built for battle. Akino let her hands glide over his abdomen, the well-defined six-pack. What a remarkable body, Akino murmured with a mix of admiration and desire in her voice. Hard as steel, but with a softness that's very pleasant to feel. She didn't bother hiding her enjoyment as her fingers continued to explore. Kaneko, though much more reserved, also found herself touching Hideki's body almost unconsciously. Her small hands brushed over an old scar on his thigh as she tried to apply some healing magic, but the sensation of his warm skin and firm muscles distracted her. The heat in her face grew, and though she tried to stay calm, her breathing quickened slightly. Two shouldn't be touching so much, Kaneko murmured to herself, but her fingers continued to trace Hideki's body, feeling the texture of his skin and the scars that told so many battle stories. There was something about the vulnerability of the moment that made her feel closer to him. Akino, always perceptive, didn't miss the chance to tease her friend. Kaneko-kun, she said in a mischievous tone, a playful smile on her lips. Do you like what you're feeling? Kaneko, startled, immediately pulled her hand away, her face completely red. No! That's not it, she said quickly, looking away in embarrassment. Though she tried to hide it, the way she had been caressing Hideki's body betrayed something deeper, a physical connection she didn't fully understand herself. Akino laughed softly, enjoying Kaneko's discomfort as she continued her task, clearly delighting in the situation. Kaneko, still blushing, shot a quick glance at Hideki before focusing on something else, trying to regain her usual calm. But deep down, she knew Akino was right. There was something about Hideki that made her feel a way she couldn't quite comprehend. In a corner of the room, Issei watched the scene with a mix of emotions, but one in particular stood out: a deep, gut-wrenching envy. His eyes filled with tears as he saw Kaneko and Akino tending to Hideki, both leaning over his body. It should have been me, he exclaimed in a dramatic whisper, his fists clenched against the floor, trembling with frustration. Tears began to stream down his cheeks as his mind kept repeating over and over how unfair it all seemed. Not him, I'm the protagonist of this story. Kiba, standing beside him, leaned in with a soothing smile, though clearly amused by the situation. Despite being used to Issei's antics, he never ceased to be amazed by how far his friend could take his jealousy. Come on, Issei. It's not that big of a deal, Kiba said in his usual calm tone, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder to try to calm him down. Hideki is badly hurt. You should feel a little compassion for him. Compassion? Compassion? Issei turned to Kiba, his eyes still filled with tears and his face completely distraught. That guy has Akeno-san touching his chest and Kaneko-kun caressing his scars. That should be happening to me, he whined, pouting dramatically as he slumped against the wall. Kiba chuckled softly, unable to help himself. Though he understood Issei's feelings, the situation was almost comical. I get that you're jealous, but Hideki is unconscious. I don't think he's enjoying the situation much, Kiba commented with a calm smile. Besides, you should be glad they're helping someone who's injured. Issei let out a frustrated groan, rubbing his eyes to dry the tears that kept falling. It doesn't matter if he's unconscious. Look at how they're touching him, he complained again, pointing toward Hideki, who was still lying on the couch as Akino finished applying her healing magic. Those muscles, those scars. Kaneko and Akeno-san wouldn't look at me like that even if I fought a demon 10 times stronger than me. Kiba sighed and gave him a few pats on the shoulder, trying to be the understanding friend Issei needed at that moment. You have to be patient, Issei. Your moment will come. And besides, Kiba paused, looking at Issei with an even bigger smile. Don't you think it would be more impactful if you earned their attention in a less dramatic way? Issei stared at him for a moment, pondering his words, but then let out another huff. You don't get it, Kiba. It's always him, the cool guy who gets all the attention. I want that kind of attention too, he whined, crossing his arms and sinking even deeper into his self-pity. Kiba, amused, simply nodded and decided to let Issei have his moment. Thanks for listening to my video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment below your favorite part. Sayonara, see you in the next video.